Welcome everyone to the 2021 Rebuilding New York Summit. My name is Ralph Ortega, Editor-in-Chief of City and State New York. Thank you all for being here and joining us today. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors for their continued support of City and State New York. iCore Strategies, Casira, KPMG, TD Bank, ACOM, Boingo, Cozen O'Connor, Infrastructure Engineering, L&M Development Partners, Rebel, and WSP. Just a few housekeeping points to make sure, if you're writing in the chat box, that you send your message to everyone, not just panelists, so all attendees can see what you're saying. Please also submit any questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Any questions submitted to the chat box may get lost in the conversation and chat going. So be sure to submit those to the Q&A box, and each moderator will bring a few to each panel, time permitting, of course. Now let's get into our program. First up, we have Ralph Bumbuka, New York City Market President at TD Bank, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. Ralph.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you to City and State and Tom Allen. Great to be here with everyone. And on behalf of my colleagues at TD Bank, we are pleased to sponsor today's conference, Rebuilding New York. There is no stopping New York on building back better. That is what New Yorkers do. This past weekend, my thoughts were on the tragedy and pain of 9/11. And I was also moved on how this large metropolitan city suddenly transformed into a small town, supporting each other as we mourned, recovered, and rebuilt. For me, it reinforced the resilience and resolve of all New Yorkers, that we can come back with empathy, grace, and a focused purpose. At TD, our commitment is to our people and our communities, and I'm proud of the success of TD in supporting all New Yorkers, whether through our efforts to finance affordable housing projects, support local chambers to certify MWBEs, funding local community development institutions supporting small businesses, providing no-fee checking accounts, and now as the anchor tenant in the new skyscraper, One Vanderbilt, that will house our flagship branch on the corner of Madison and 42nd, opening in just a few short weeks. TD continues to invest in New York City. We build in New York City, and we believe in New York City. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Rachel Loeb, President of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, where she oversees the EDC's portfolio of projects focused on life science, land use, investments in infrastructure and innovation, overseeing and directing strategic priorities for real estate, asset management, and neighborhood planning. Highlights of Rachel's work to date include negotiating Steiner Studios to develop a new film and television production hub at the Made in New York campus in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, hometown for me, which will support 2,200 jobs and fund local workforce development to diversify the film and television industry, and advancing plans to activate the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal as a staging, installation, and maintenance site for the growing offshore wind industry. Rachel has also been instrumental in supporting New York City's EDC's work to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and plans for the city's economic recovery. Please join me in welcoming Rachel Loeb to today's conference.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you and to TD Bank for all that you do for New York City and your commitment to New York City. We thank you very much for that and your leadership. And I also want to thank City and State Editor-in-Chief Ralph Ortega for having me here today and hosting this important series about conversations about post-pandemic economic recovery. We all know that the pandemic caused record unemployment, devastated our economy, and sadly took countless lives. The pandemic showed us clearly the disparity caused by systemic inequities and injustices. And the pandemic showed us where investments must be made if we are to have a recovery for for all of us. And now we stand at that precipice because we cannot return to the way things were. Now is the time to reimagine our future and jumpstart our economy. If we've learned anything over this past year and a half, is that we cannot have economic health without public health. And if the last few weeks have really punctuated that we cannot have economic health without climate health. I truly believe that these will be the two principles that guide us toward a more equitable and inclusive economic recovery. Today, as we bring together experts from the public and private sectors, I hope you will keep those two guiding principles in mind. I do as I oversee the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We're the organization that works on behalf of the city to drive and shape economic development across the 5 boroughs, using city resources to build partnerships between agencies, private businesses, and local communities. We are 500 dedicated public servants who do this in 3 key ways. First, on behalf of the city, we serve as a key asset manager for the city. We oversee and are the stewards for 66 million square feet of public real estate, which we are constantly investing in and upgrading to maximize economic impact. For example, we manage the ground leases at the Manhattan and Brooklyn cruise terminals because the ports are city assets. Similarly, we manage the city's wholesale food markets up in the Bronx. And yes, we are the agency who renegotiated the extension of the leases under JFK Airport in February, which helped keep JetBlue's headquarters here in New York City and unlock the redevelopment of those terminals. And we not only manage assets, we build and invest in neighborhood infrastructure to ensure communities remain affordable and sustainable. And we work to address the real effects of climate change. For example, we are leading the study on Lower Manhattan coastal resiliency with the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. And we continue to call the drive for federal funding there to help us protect the city from sea level rise and storm surge, along with addressing drainage improvements to lessen the impact of future storms like Hurricane Ida. We also manage and oversee the design and construction of projects across the city. Some notable past examples include the Postcards 9/11 Museum Memorial in Staten Island, the High Line in Manhattan, or Lakeside in Prospect Park. Currently, we have projects in the work, many projects in the work, creating good paying construction jobs, like the new New York City Health and Hospital Ruth Bader Ginsburg Hospital located in Coney Island. That project cost is $780 million. And we had an important MWB goal of 30%, which we will exceed. And it's set to be completed by the end of next year. Or the Made in New York campus in the Sunset Park waterfront, which will provide manufacturers with affordable, best-in-class industrial facilities for garment making, and where our MW participation rate there is over 60%. And we partner with the private sector on projects like the Bronx Point in the South Bronx, which will contribute 540 permanently affordable homes, the Universal Hip Hop Museum, and is meeting its 35% MWB goal. Finally, EDC invests in growing whole new industries to make our economy diverse and resilient, keep the city competitive, and as a place to continue to draw and retain talent. Industries like life sciences will set the city on a path to become a biotech and public health capital, where vaccines, treatments, cures are born and technology advances. Investment in this industry supports the creation of good paying jobs, not just in science, but construction jobs that are needed to build new wet lab facilities and to ensure that we are ready for the next pandemic. I am proud that the mayor just doubled the city's investment from $500 million to $1 billion to expand the life science sector. We expect this investment to generate 40,000 good paying jobs in the entire life science ecosystem over the next 5 years. Early investments in life sciences help the city through our fight against COVID-19. For example, EDC helped launch the Pandemic Response Lab at the height of the pandemic. Until we had the vaccine, rapid and reliable testing combined with the test and trace program were the only way that we could help keep New Yorkers safe and get the economy open and moving again. The lab took over a significant portion of the COVID-19 testing for the city, helping residents get their results in just under 2 days and making pool testing available and more affordable for schools. As the lab continues to process most of the city's COVID test results, it is also studying the variant sequencing to help guide public health policy as we move forward and continue to open our economy. And it is critical to keeping our residents safe and our economy open. As we move forward, protecting our city against the effects of climate change will also be critical. I believe implementing green recovery will improve the lives of New Yorkers, safeguard vulnerable communities, and create the jobs of the future. For example, let's take Local Law 97 in New York City, which limits the emissions on buildings. EDC is looking at how do we take that from legislation into green jobs and innovation. We are currently exploring new ways of approaching prop tech so we can use it to test and scale innovative clean tech solutions that benefit city assets and help them comply. I don't think prop tech should just be a benefit to high-end luxury buildings. We want to make sure and create a market that helps buildings become more energy efficient. We released an RFP last year seeking partners who could listen to the needs of the city, go out to the prop tech startup market, and provide recommendations for technologies and innovations to pilot on city assets. This partnership will ensure that we are making this exchange between what startups need and what the city needs to truly work. And over time, we imagine the technology we help pilot and advance beyond just the planning and development stage will reduce greenhouse gases, help with construction management, innovate emergency response techniques, and create good jobs. When we talk about the green economy, we are really talking about the reliance on renewable energy and the jobs of the future coming together. We are getting ready to announce our vision to make New York City a hub for the offshore wind development, an industry that will bring all levels of jobs to New Yorkers and offer our neighborhoods clean alternative energy. Currently, EDC oversees offshore wind efforts at the Sunset Park Marine Terminal in Brooklyn. Not only is this industry critical to the future of providing renewable energy for the city, we also have the opportunity to build an industry from the ground up and make sure that all New Yorkers participate. So how do we do that? We start early before the operations even begin, and we embed equity into all of our partnership agreements to make sure that our partners train and hire locally. This new industry is a significant opportunity to increase diversity in the construction workforce and help MWBEs take advantage of green jobs. EDC is now working to identify an operator to help us develop minority and women-owned offshore wind construction companies, build capacity now so that they can be ready to compete and obtain city contracts. This is just one example. And as we work to reform the procurement process to make it easier, more equitable, and more efficient. Through our Construct NYC mentorship program, we work to connect small to mid-sized minority, women, veteran, and disadvantaged businesses with exclusive opportunities to work on EDC projects for up to $1 million. We have a robust program, and in 2021 alone, we made payments of $176 million to MWBEs at an award rate of 41%. We are proud of this accomplishment, especially considering the slowdown in the construction industry as a result of the pandemic, but we're not getting complacent. We are working to address this inequity as we see growing evidence that even with MWBE programs, they disproportionately benefit firms that are owned and operated by non-minority women, and therefore do not generate as many opportunities for firms certified Asian, Black, or Hispanic owned. Starting in the last year, we are beginning to take a deeper dive into our own data, breaking it down by race and ethnicity, which show the number of contracts going on to certain groups. After further analyzing this trend, we're fully committed to addressing the inequities to counteract this documented disparity within the disparity. We are doing this by continuing to hold ourselves accountable and working to establish a comprehensive disparities study that will allow us to set disaggregated goals. Further, through our Construct NYC program, we offer critical business management and operations guidance to MWBs to set them up for success. Since the year of 2016, we have trained 84 companies. They've won 95 awards totaling almost $60 million, and they've increased their revenue by over 22% a year after their training. Lastly, we see opportunities for growth and economic recovery through investments in sustainable infrastructure, which moves commerce off roadways and onto waterways and railways. The city's $100 million commitment to our Freight NYC initiative will lessen the city's over-reliance on long-haul trucking. Large trucks are one of the largest causes of damage to aging roads and bridges, while also polluting our city. We know that truck construction alone could cost the local economy $27 billion over the next 30 years, hurting local businesses and impeding commerce. EDC is focused on transporting goods more quickly in ways that are cleaner and more cost-effective. We are working on roadway and rail improvements, while long-term looking to leverage public-private partnerships to develop a marine highway barge landing system across the city's waterways, among other plans to increase marine traffic. After all, our city was born as a marine powerhouse. The water can once again be our future, but we need to build the right access. We believe efforts like this could possibly create up to 5,000 good-paying industrial jobs, as well as reduce some of the harmful impacts, air pollution in communities that are disproportionately affected. In closing, I'm sure it's clear to all of us that there's no one solution for how we deliver an equitable economic recovery, but there are certainly key areas to spend our time on. It will be imperative for both the public and private sectors to shore up the construction industry and use our collective strengths to drive the approaches that actually rebuild the city and state we know and love. Construction is an economic multiplier. For every $1 million spent on construction, a total of 8 jobs is created in New York City. And construction and real estate companies comprise 20% of the city's GDP, while providing 10% of jobs, 5% of wages. These jobs are the gateway to middle class and create opportunities for small women, disadvantaged veteran, and women-owned businesses. And we should, in our conversations today, be looking together to figure out how to continue to drive an inclusive economic recovery for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time, Rachel. We really appreciate having you here with us today and kicking off our webinar.
Thank you.
Now we'll get into our panels. First, we have Sharon Lee of iCore Strategies and former Queensborough president, moderating our first panel titled Design and Construction in a Post-Pandemic Era. Sharon.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you, Rachel Loeb, for your inspiring remarks and for your leadership. Indeed, there is much to look forward to here in New York. As mentioned, I am Sharon Lee with iCore Strategies, the largest Black-owned management consulting firm in the nation. We, with our data-driven approach in over 30 cities, we advise Fortune 100 companies on the equitable deployment and impact of capital in communities. It is my pleasure to facilitate this distinguished panel with leading industry experts on public works. iCore is delighted to co-sponsor this very timely summit by city and state on rebuilding New York. I know that as of this morning, we had over 750 registrants for this summit. And so thank you to Tom and Ralph and Amanda and Alexis and your team for your foresight and your tremendous lift to making this webinar possible. You know, here in New York, we are approaching the 9-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, and climate change is now front and center. We were reminded of this by Hurricane Isaias and the prolonged suffering last year, Hurricane Ida just a couple weeks ago, as mentioned by Rachel, and in Ida's wake, the heart-wrenching fatalities and devastation, especially in Queens. But resiliency and hardening of our infrastructure is no longer just about our coastlines and previously identified high-risk flood zones, right? It's housing, transit, schools, roads, everything that's interconnected, as Rachel had mentioned in her keynote. And the pandemic really exposed and was the ultimate stress test on our underlying conditions and our weakest links, right? The pandemic and the numerous emergencies and the crises magnified our deficiencies from decades of disparities among communities, disinvestment, mismanagement of infrastructure investments. But the good news is that resources are on the way, are promising. cautiously optimistic with the impending historic bipartisan infrastructure deal. And at stake for New York, billions with a B, billions of dollars in funding for our essentials, for our roads, our schools, our housing, water, sewer, broadband, our ports. And so as we rise in this post-pandemic era, we have both a chance and an imperative to build not just on time and on budget, but to build better, to build stronger, and arguably just as important, more equitably and at scale. And so the urgency to accelerate our rebuild equitably requires leveraging public and private partnerships in ways that we just haven't seen in recent decades. And so this afternoon, we will hear from industry leaders on every element of infrastructure, from transportation, tech, and more. But for the next 45 minutes, we will focus specifically on innovative urban solutions for design and construction in post-pandemic New York. So let's dive right in. Although everyone on this panel needs no introduction, I will ask that each speaker take 30 seconds to introduce yourselves before answering your first question. And I will ask Brian Kavanagh to answer my first question. Senator, capital projects in post-pandemic New York are now subject to a host of greater imperatives, such as health and safety challenges, especially labor peace agreements, capacity policies, local laws. How do you foresee these impacting public works projects in New York, namely feasibility, design and construction, time horizons of projects, budgets, and so forth? Senator?
Great. Thank you very much, Sharon. And let me begin by thanking City and State and all the sponsors of this terrific and really timely event. And it's a great pleasure to serve on such a distinguished panel of lots of folks who know a lot more about delivering capital projects than I'll ever know. So it's a big question we're starting with. First of all, I just want to highlight something that Sharon mentioned, which is that we really are looking at a potentially massive infusion of capital spending in the wake of COVID. And it is partly a result of, the sense of emergency, in the sense that government has to kind of come to the table with big solutions, that I think has been inspired by the need to respond to the pandemic. And also just, I think, some changes in the political realities in our state and our country. So far, the pandemic response has largely been about expenditures, expense budget items. In housing, we now have $2.85 billion in federal and state funds to pay arrears, rent arrears, and another $600 million to cover homeowner expenses. Anyone who's been reading the papers knows that some of that money has been slow to go out. The good news is we are now in a process of moving money out fairly rapidly to cover all of those rent arrears. And that's critical for the housing sector to ensure, obviously, that tenants aren't displaced, but also that we don't have a giant debt crisis coming out of this for property owners. But the levels of funding that folks are talking about at the federal level really are enormous, and there is real optimism from our congressional delegation, from Senator Schumer on down, that we're going to see really enormous amounts of expenditures, particularly, hopefully, for public housing. And I'm glad Greg Russ is here to talk about that. On the state level, we're seeing we're coming to the end of a 5-year capital plan for housing, a $20 billion plan over the last 5 years. And again, in 2017, I think the political realities were very different. And we had Republicans in the Senate who I think had somewhat different priorities, both less focus on New York City and I think less focus on housing and other equity issues. So that is something that just people should focus on. We've passed legislation that requires a more formal process where it'll be proposed up front in the budget process and negotiated, and I think in a more public way than previous ones. And again, the last one was $20 billion over 5 years. I'm expecting and hoping that this one will be even larger, and I think tailored to some of the needs that we have now. Just briefly, what all that will require, first of all, we need to improve the ways public agencies procure and design and construction services. If we are going to have billion-dollar projects and potentially multi-billion-dollar pots of money to do housing projects, we're going to need to be more efficient. We've done some experimenting in recent years with design build in the public sector, but we're way behind the way the private sector procures these services. So I hope some of my other colleagues will be talking about, how to get construction managers and how to have companies that can come in and take responsibility for entire projects, assume some of the risks and deliver on time or ahead of schedule, and also just smooth the the timelines and deliver more rapidly. We need to think a lot about how to reuse buildings for different purposes. We've seen during COVID reductions in, sometimes we're just in some ways we're continuing long-term trends around, retail shifting from bricks and mortar to online. We've seen the hotel sector, take a huge hit. We began an experiment in trying to authorize reuse of these buildings with something called HONDA, which is the Housing Our Neighbors with Dignity Act. It is, I think, fair to say, a pilot program. It's a $100 million state program that is intended to promote the switch from hotels to permanent housing. But I think the negotiations around that are instructive. Some of us, including myself, tried to get flexibility around zoning. So some hotels in M1 zones might be more easily converted to housing. We tried to get some flexibility around, the buildings department and C of O's being issued. And those proposals at the state level were rejected. There was just not a consensus we should do those things. So we are going to still try to move forward with converting some hotels to housing. But I think if we're going to retool a lot of this physical infrastructure in response to COVID, we're going to need some more flexibility there. There's going to be a greater attention to affordability and economic integration. I think, again, COVID really, as Sharon said, has highlighted essential workers who make very low wages and often can't live anywhere near the centers of our cities. In my own district, we have 5 World Trade Center project. There's this huge call from a very wealthy, privileged community to include a lot more affordability there at all levels. And so that you're going to see that call in a lot of places, I think. Attention to resiliency, Sharon's always mentioned. I would just note, in addition to the fact that we need to understand that flooding is not just a coastal phenomenon, but the amounts of rain we had last week really were unprecedented. But they're not. It's going to be a precedent for what's coming next. I would also just note extreme heat is a huge and unrecognized need. It is already killing New Yorkers. It's actually killing folks, a lot more people in other cities. And we have to look at how we're cooling and how we're creating the ability for people to stay safe in heat waves, which are going to become more the norm during the summers. The last thing I just want to say is that a lot of the ways we've done business in the past, I think, did not adequately focus on the question of how much public value we're getting for our money. I think particularly if tax subsidy programs like 421A, I think a lot of us think that the public, in exchange for a very large amount of foregone taxes, we're not getting adequate value for the taxes we're foregoing. That is a program that's up next year. And I think there's going to be, it's fair to say that a lot of legislators perceive that we're going to need a really different approach if we're going to continue programs like that, and probably including additional affordability, but also questions about resiliency and energy efficiency and those things. And we'll be looking, the new administration, I think, will play a big role. The new mayoral administration will play a big role in sort of setting the agenda on that. I've talked a lot, again, a wonderful panel, so let's hear from other folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chairman Greg Russ of the New York City Housing Authority, capital projects in post-pandemic New York. How do the imperatives impact public works?
Sharon, thanks, and good to see the panel members, and thanks so much for City and State for hosting. And let's talk a little bit, because we've been thinking a lot about this. I think the Senator mentioned the prospects of combinations of infrastructure bills, the bill you mentioned in your opening, as well as the potential for reconciliation. Even if only portions of these monies become real, it is 5 or 6 times greater than the total amount of capital that the Housing Authority has been receiving, for example, from the federal government, even at the smallest end. So what are we thinking about? Well, I think we have to start with the notion that we're here to preserve all the existing public housing and to improve it. And that means a number of things. It means we have to start with new understandings around design. Design has to be much more comprehensive. We can't treat buildings piecemeal anymore. And that also means integrating certain kinds of technology into these buildings. And I would list them in sort of broad categories: health, energy, security, and water. And the water technology is enormous, because if you go to a sandy site, you've seen the systems lifted to the roof. That is now something we have to think about for every building, or we have to think about alternative systems that don't have boiler rooms in the basement. That's an enormous technology shift. In addition, we have to think about everything related to water flow, backflow preventers on all the lines that come into these buildings. These are really tough construction issues, and we're going to need to design with those things in mind, and either using new technologies, which touches on green or energy, to provide heat, hot water, and potentially cooling, depending on the technology. And these packages, emergency generators for each building or for each group of buildings. Even now, when we have voltage reductions, we lose elevators because those motors are not designed to run below a certain level, and we need to compensate for that in some way, plus make sure that our essential systems are running. So this design, which I hope in the next few months, as we understand how much money is coming, this is something that we want to start thinking about for our properties so that we can preserve and renew them. In addition, our approach to construction and investment, and I would say, how do you rehabilitate an occupied building? Can you rehabilitate that building from a construction and technology standpoint from the outside in? We don't have a building where you can put materials in an elevator and just run them up to the 10th floor. The elevator is not going to make it. The elevators are too small. If we're going to do these buildings the way that they need to be addressed, we need to think about what are the technologies that we have to bring to how we approach a high-rise building and how we rehabilitate it. And that just doesn't benefit NYCHA. That's a question I think a lot of residential structures are going to have to ask, because there just simply is not the ability to relocate thousands and thousands of people. So we also want to make sure that that process has a deep resident engagement. We've committed to that to our resident leaders, and we intend to follow through on that. And that has to be part of the design, the construction approaches, and finally, the construction opportunities that we create. If we invest billions of dollars, that means tons of jobs. I think Rachel gave a number that was pretty potent. And the other question we have is, if we're building this much, would we manufacture things locally? I don't know how everyone else is doing, but we find these supply chain disruptions really, really difficult right now. In the beginning, late summer, you couldn't get cabinets because you couldn't get wood. Now it's other things. So what are the kinds of things we could do here in this city? And that's a job. That's a production job. That's a manufacturing job or assembly job of some kind that could really be brought here. So we've been thinking about all that, and we've been thinking about it not just with our financial approach with the blueprint, but if we get grant money from the federal government, the same problems await us, and we're hopeful that we can kind of punch through some of them and really come up with some solutions that marry some of the ideas we're discussing here this afternoon. So the money brings an opportunity, sure, but it also brings us an opportunity to rethink how we do this construction business differently in light of what we know from COVID and the storms we've encountered, and the way to how do you rehabilitate 110,000 apartments over time. So we're hopeful that opens some doors for us.
Thank you for that overview, Mr. Chairman. I see Commissioner Torres Springer of the Department of Design and Construction. Commissioner, would you like to share with us your thoughts on the impact of the imperatives on future public works in New York?
Sure, and I'm sorry to be a couple minutes late here, but I'll just jump in. I'm really pleased to be here today and talk about this subject. I think sort of definitely echo and support a lot of what I heard Senator Kavanagh and Greg say. I'm not sure if others were speaking before them, but I'll focus a little bit more on how we deliver rather than concerns about what we deliver. I mean, certainly, you know, on the what we deliver front, we have a growing portfolio as a city in terms of our capital program and do expect it to grow further. Very focused on transformative projects that address resiliency issues and sustainability issues. And also, you know, just building the city. And of course, you know, another thing always in the news and timely is our effort to build 4 borough-based jails and close Rikers Island, which is the long-term solution. So we have a lot on our plate, and of course, it's the nature of public capital delivery to have these kinds of added complexities, you know, everything ranging from additional goals we're trying to achieve to making sure that we go through the right process of community engagement. When projects become more complex like that, the delivery process needs to become less complex, which is what we've been working on here at DDC. We have a blueprint for construction excellence with a target of saving 36 months from the average capital project that we're delivering. I actually had an opportunity to write about this in the Daily News in relation to DDC's role in cleaning up the pile after 9/11, which we did under an emergency order that allowed us to use alternative delivery tools, design build, CM build, going with best value selection, and then a whole range of changes that we've been making at DDC to streamline the way that we do business, from upfront planning and thinking about what projects are and what their budget needs to be, so that everybody's clear-eyed going in, to enhance project management, overhauling our construction contract to make sure that we really are incentivizing on time and on budget delivery. So all that work is underway. And I will say that I think the best example of this is that during the pandemic, we've done an enormous amount of work. One example is we delivered 3 post-COVID acute care facilities for health and hospitals in 3 underserved neighborhoods across the city. $120 million worth of very high quality healthcare facility work. We delivered in 6 months what would normally have taken us 6 years to do. And it's because we were able to use emergency authorization to go ahead and put together an integrated team and achieve very efficient delivery. So I know Greg is working on similar innovations and structures with the NYCHA Trust. And we're all working together as a city, you know, doing this work and also trying to position ourselves for the next administration to be able to really capitalize on more flexibility in delivery.
Thank you, Commissioner. And maybe you can touch on this. When you talked about the how, what are the most innovative and effective ways to improve utility of specifically MWBEs for building in post-pandemic New York when we focus on equitable build?
Yeah, this has been a major priority of this administration. And we're really proud of what we've achieved. We were over 30% MWB utilization last fiscal year. We're going to hit about 25% this fiscal year, but on a much bigger base of work that was done this past fiscal year than the previous year. So it represents hundreds of millions of dollars. And actually, I'll say we're 56% of the city's total local law 1 utilization at DDC. So what we've been doing is very aggressively setting targets and pushing for high MWBE utilization. We created a new business development unit that's doing a lot of outreach and just making sure that the connections are made between MWBE and non-MWBE firms. But then a few things that I think are really going to.
If somebody's lying, it's obvious because they don't have the card.
I think Molly, you need to mute.
My card in my phone.
A few things that we're doing going forward that will really make a difference. Because what we really need to do here in the construction industry is really help to create primes. I mean, that's really the key to getting higher MWBE numbers. You know, that lots of firms out there doing lots of good work, but to really get the numbers up, we need MWBs to be in a position to prime the jobs. And we're doing that by, we now have authorization from the legislature to create a mentoring program, which the School Construction Authority, thank you, Senator, and your colleagues, the School Construction Authority has been made effective use of, so that we can bring in MWB firms, pair them with more experienced firms, and help them to develop the skill sets that they need. And then also, again, the legislature authorized us to do all discretionary contracts under $500,000, which is up from $100,000. And our commitment as an administration is we're going to do, you know, the default is that those discretionary contracts are going to MWBEs. And, you know, if they're not, we're accountable. We have to answer for it. But we're going to get that done. And that helps to build capacity. Lastly, I'll also say just that we're acutely aware of the disparity within the disparity, the underutilization of firms that are owned by Black, Hispanic, and Native American New Yorkers. And we're very focused on that disparity, in particular with the use of the $500,000 discretionary contract and our mentoring program and all the outreach that we're doing. So we're excited about the opportunity to improve MWB utilization in the city.
Commissioner, I saw a lot of head nodding in the room as you were talking about that. I'd like to hear more from our private industry partners and friends. Spencer Orcus of L&M Partners, what's your take on how do we get more effective, innovative ways to utilize MWBEs?
So I think, you know, the city's requirements to date have been a great help of pushing the industry to include MWBEs. You know, I would say probably, you know, 80% of our jobs we're partnered with MWBEs and or nonprofits. And we have, I think, about 6 full-time people in our office that are dedicated to building a bidders list and a group of contractors that we can partner up with on these projects, material suppliers, and focusing on the local recruitment as well. And you know, from there, then it's just enabling these contractors to have, I think, supporting their back of house is another big element. You know, most contractors come from someone that's very talented, working from another contractor, splits off, wants to start his own business, and being able to run a set of books, get insurance, things of that nature is always a first challenge. So that's something that I think the industry can help with. And then, you know, it takes a balance sheet and to be able to get insurance. And I think the nonprofit and for-profit private sector have really stepped up in the last year on that front. There's an incredible number of funds out there that are providing startup capital for MWBEs, and that will help them get their first job and get their foot in the door.
Thank you for that, Mr. Orcus. I see Michael Sutton of Infrastructure Engineering. I saw you nodding your head a lot. From professional services perspective, how can we get a fair share of these contracts?
Well, first of all, I would say all hands on deck. That's what I would say. What I'm hearing is from public officials, private sector in the architecture and engineering business is that our labor is going to be stressed. It's already kind of stressed. I'll give you an example. We have several offices. My name is Michael Sutton, president of Infrastructure Engineering, office in New York, office in Trenton, New Jersey, office in Chicago, office in Detroit, office in Indianapolis. And And so what are we hearing? We're hearing that there's not enough labor. Give you an example in Detroit. Firms are at capacity. They're turning down work. They're saying, we can't even go after another job because we're at capacity. We don't have the staff to take on more work. And so that is an opportunity, especially for underutilized M and WBEs, because now with all the work that is coming out, how are we going to meet all the labor requirements? How are we going to get all this stuff done? And so one of the ways to do it is, again, to utilize what we call historically underutilized businesses. And that's the minority, women, and businesses. So I would say, first of all, that I'm really appreciative of all the programs. We have mentored, and we have been mentored. We're doing that right now. At the same time that we're mentoring others, we're being mentored by others, to create capabilities and things that the firm is not strong in. And the capabilities that we are strong in, we're mentoring other firms, other MWBEs. And so what I also like what Commissioner Torres Springer said about creating primes. I believe that is the goal of the M and WBE program, is creating primes. We just won from the city, New York City DDC, $8 million task order contract for design services, a $30 million resident engineering and inspection project from New York City DDC. What is that going to do for our New York office? That's going to expand our New York office, probably double its size in the next year or two. It's going to provide us a direct relationship with the people at New York City DDC. When we work as a prime, as a sub, we don't have that direct relationship. And so, so it's really going to accelerate our growth. We already do about 60% of our work as a prime already. That contract, those two contracts may boost our percentage of prime work to about 80%. And so, giving us the ability to compete on other DDC projects and other projects with other agencies. So what else would I have to say about that is that there's going to be, with all this work coming, it has been voiced by many people in the industry about the labor shortage and the labor requirements that it's going to take. We're talking to, even agencies are saying, like, I would go out to Metro in LA and speak with the executive director out there. He says, we can't get all the work out the door because we don't even have the people in the agency to get the work out the door. And so then he's also saying that the consulting and architecture community and construction community, even if we can get all the work out the door, they can't do it. And so now, again, that labor supply, so it's a great opportunity. Let me tell you, I'm excited about it, really. I'm really excited about it. And the other thing that I'm excited about is, again, I'm not excited about COVID, but COVID has accelerated what was coming anyway, which is remote work, which is the transformation of how we do business. I was sandbagging that, right? I was resisting that. And but COVID has accelerated. And we human beings, we are intelligent, right? That means intelligence means the ability to change and adapt. Don't fight it. Embrace it. Let's see how we can make it work.
I would just like to quickly layer onto what Michael was saying about the labor shortage. It is an enormous issue approaching, particularly if the funds start ramping up at the federal level. And I think, to the extent that trade schools and associate degrees can be expanded to address that. I mean, the unemployment levels show that there's certainly the people out there that need the jobs. And I think the contractors themselves will say they can only do so much. They train someone, then suddenly they get poached. So I think more attention around that area would be super helpful.
Yeah, it's going to be. I can see with the labor shortage is firms are just going to be hiring each other's people. I'll take somebody from this firm, they'll take my people and go, and it's just, so we really need to increase the amount of architects, engineers, and tradesmen in our industry. And it's not just about the AEC industry, it's the insurance industry. We use all kind of lawyers, we use architects. Even now, our IT department, I talked to my IT guy, and with the remote work, it's really much more difficult for the IT people right now to manage our IT systems, because now there's so many avenues for hacking and everything else. So, I know firms that's been hacked, and I know some that have paid the ransom, and I know others that have not paid the ransom. But the IT has even become more complicated with the remote work, and so anyway, that's my comments regarding that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Mr. Sutton, Mr. Orcus. The idea of, not a new one, right? Partnering with the trade unions, the associations, labor. It's really going to take a lot of partnerships in this new era of building. Before I go on to the next question, for folks who are tuning in, I know we have a couple hundred folks who are here in the webinar room. We encourage you to add your questions into the chat. We'll try to get to it at the tail end of this panel, of this segment. But I want to encourage and welcome you to add your questions into the chat. But going off of the partnerships, and I'm going to ask Tom Servo of AECOM, what types of partnerships in particular are critical for this post-pandemic era?
Yeah, great to be with you all today. Thanks for the question. I think in terms of partnerships, I think it's imperative that we start by engaging local community and the non-for-profits, and we have to do it early, we have to do it often, and really, I think it's about trying to understand the true needs that are on the ground. The other partnership that we need is we need government to work together, right? State and local government, but more importantly, I think today in New York City, we need the interagency collaboration across New York City and able to be able to deliver large and complex projects that address multiple concerns. One area where this level of cooperation and collaboration, I think, could be leveraged is really around what we heard the senator and others talk about, was this conversion of commercial space to residential space. 20% of New York City's commercial office space is sitting vacant. It's 12 million square feet of potential opportunity for residential space, coupled with new open space could really reinvigorate New York City. Looking at tax incentives, modifying zoning laws, there are a number of properties that sit as of right that could be converted to residential properties where they stand today. I think another area that requires kind of new partnerships is thinking about the delivery of big transformative projects for New York City. That, these are the projects that I think build confidence that New York is coming back. It's also speaking to a new vision for New York City. And in today's era, these post-pandemic projects, they really need to address multiple issues. We heard, Jamie and others talk about it. They have to serve multiple functions. They have to do more for New Yorkers. You can't just address climate change. You need to address climate change and address longstanding systemic inequities. When you're building and designing a park, you need to be thinking about how that park can serve local schools and even local businesses for classrooms and office space. But I think, ultimately, I wanted to throw out one kind of example of a big transformative projects that requires this level of partnership, and that project is the Cross Bronx Expressway. So I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up adjacent to the Cross Bronx. It's the worst of the worst in terms of negative social and health outcomes in a community. It's a project today that requires billions of dollars just to bring it to a state of good repair and make it safe. So when you think about a large project like that, you really need to look about how can you reimagine that project for the community, where you can deck over portions of the roadway, reconnect the community, create new and open green space that the Bronx has really been underinvested in for the past 30 years in terms of open space and green space. But it also creates the new housing opportunities, introduction of new transit and mobility options. And it's really all about access to jobs, access to healthcare and other services. So, in my view, that is one of the most important projects in the city in terms of tackling, long-standing systemic inequities, but also creating, lasting positive outcomes for generations of New Yorkers. And then going back to the partnership, to accomplish a project like that, there's no one agency that makes all those decisions, right? So just like the private sector has to come together and collaborate to deliver a project like that, we also need our city agencies and city government to collaborate to deliver a project and a vision like that for the community as well.
And Mr. Serbo, I'm seeing in the chat, some folks are asking, what was that project called that you mentioned?
It's the Cross Bronx Expressway. So it's a bit of a social advocacy project for me, a bit of a passion in terms of really bringing change to the Bronx around a project that has really contributed so much to some of the negative outcomes there.
Thank you for that. And I know, Mr. Sutton, you want to touch on more and expand upon some of the partnership ideas and thoughts.
When I think about partnerships, of course, same thing that Tom said, the agency partnership, the community, all the what we call the stakeholders involved in a project. I believe in building consensus. You can't please everybody. However, if you can please most of the people, that is what we strive to do. And again, there's also partnerships between the companies that work together. Creating that type of partnership where we as a prime, and I'm quite sure this is the same thing as Tom and Spencer. We as a prime, when we team up with people, we want to team up with people that delivers, that can help us deliver the project. We don't have to do that work for them. We want to have that type of confidence in our teaming partners, and so and it makes it kind of difficult sometimes, in the teaming situations because of there's new firms and all that type of stuff, but. A lot of times when I think about teaming on a project is running the project with all the stakeholders, how we can get everybody to the table and to move the project along. And then even before we get to the stakeholders, about pulling that team together to deliver that project, which we call the project manager's creed, on schedule, within budget, of high quality and technical excellence. So we're always focusing on that type of team, and so that's when I think about partnerships. Who are we partnering with to deliver this project? and it won't be a lot of problems, you know, and all that type of stuff. But firms are learning. When I started off, I had to learn. When I started off, our capabilities today was not our capabilities 24 years ago. So people need a start also. And not only do they need a start, they need some compassion. They need, how can I say, they need some mentoring, and then the clients also have to be tolerant also, because if we're mentoring folks and all this type of stuff, then that creates challenges in project delivery. So the clients also have to, you know, be acceptable of some of the challenges that we will face delivering a project with new people and all that. But a lot of times clients are saying, look, you're the prime, get the job done. We don't care about, your challenges that you have with your team and all that type of stuff. All we want you to do is deliver this project. And but we're also looking for clients that would say, hey, we understand, I think that, within our budgets and stuff, if we're mentoring, there should be also a fee for mentoring, because, the mentorship, a lot of times, like I say, we're teaching other people how to do engineering and architecture, and there should be some type of compensation for that also. Should that be part of project management? I think there should be a line item budget that says mentoring protege, and these are the hours for it. And so there should be some type of compensation for it.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I see that our Q&A chat has a number of questions coming through. So we're going to spend the remaining time allotted for our panel to address as many of these questions as possible. This will open up to all the panelists, both from public and private industry. The first one I see, and I'll read it for folks who are tuning in online and may not be logged into the webinar. And I believe we are streaming live on Facebook and a number of other social channels. Question here: with only 23% of office workers back in the office, and a hybrid future with much, much lower demand for office space, to someone's point earlier, number one, what efforts are emerging to convert office space to housing? And number two, can the highly leveraged real estate industry and related financial instruments support this new reality? And we're going to open it up to our 6 distinguished panelists.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to take into consideration around the topic of conversion. One is most of these office buildings are laid out in a way that would need, there tend to be very deep boxes that would need significant modification to become residential and have the light and air, satisfy the light and air needs that you need for residential. And then I think the questioner's point about the relative costs. I mean, office real estate in New York City pre-pandemic was some of the most expensive in the country, and was highly levered based on those rents. And in addition to a slump in office rents, we're still seeing, we're seeing a little bit of a turnaround in residential rents, but there was a slump in residential rents as well. And I think it will clearly vary market by market, but it's not obvious to me that the residential rents will be able to afford to both buy out the debt on the commercial property and pay for the modifications that will be needed to convert to residential. I'm sure there will be some exceptions to that, but as a broad matter, I would have that concern.
I also see in the chat, and speaking of housing, we've got various questions about homelessness, what affordable means. This is a time-tested question that I hear a lot in the city of New York. What does affordable mean? How can we make sure that there's housing for everyone? Yeah, I'm going to ask actually Senator Kavanagh if you'd like to touch on this a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and as Sharon, as you know, a question that's been asked for decades. But I do think it's. I mean, just stepping back from the pandemic, we had record amounts of construction in the city. I think New York City, according to state controller data, hit our record high in construction jobs in 2015, and then just continued to accelerate. So 2019 was the highest in history. Obviously, there's been a big step back in 2020 because of the pause and all kinds of things, including construction. And I think that most people expect there'll be a continued reduction in private sector activity, at least in the short run. But it's an irony that at the same time we are building more than ever and more rapidly than ever, we also were hitting record levels of homelessness, and we are clearly not incentivizing the right mix of housing. We have a glut of high-end condos and co-ops, luxury, and those are built partly with very generous tax incentives that basically make the properties tax-free for a very long time in exchange for a modest amount of affordability as part of the project. One approach we really do need, so we started taking steps toward preventing eviction and preventing homelessness in the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act in 2019. Before COVID, we saw a significant reduction in evictions in New York as a result, we believe, of the HSTPA, a very dramatic reduction, actually. We need to make sure that people are not becoming homeless because they can't afford homes. And that is a combination of building more at much lower levels of affordability, which requires a much greater level of public investment. And again, we're seeing potentially very large numbers coming from the federal government that should sustain, a much more generous subsidy program going forward. We've also been, a lot of us, pushing for direct rental subsidies. I've proposed now for a couple of years something called the Housing Access Voucher Program, which would basically be a state-funded Section 8 style subsidy program, far more generous than some of the existing public assistance housing subsidies that people get. And the goal, the Senate majority took the position we should start that program last year with an initial investment of $200 million, which is a large amount for a voucher program because it multiplies fairly rapidly over the years as you go forward. The prior gubernatorial administration was very resistant. We ended up with a $100 million new program for rental subsidies, which is a start, except that we're not sure that the administration has taken many steps to implement it since April, and partly because of the many other things we've had to worry about. But we do need to make sure that we're adequately investing. There are many reasons for homelessness. Substance abuse and mental health issues are certainly prominent, especially among single adults living in public spaces. But I think that COVID has given people a new sense of how problematic congregate facilities are, how problematic it is to have people living in public spaces. And we have failed now for many years to adequately invest in that. And a big part of the answer has to be deeper levels of subsidy. At the same time, somebody in the chat mentioned higher wages. We've increased the minimum wage in the last few years from about $9 an hour to $15 an hour. That's helpful too. But ordinary New Yorkers can't afford housing without a subsidy. There are other solutions that extend beyond the city of New York, including the fact that our suburbs fail to produce meaningful amounts of rental housing and multifamily housing. That's a matter of getting involved in sort of loosening restrictions on land use and zoning in the suburbs. So that's probably a conversation for another time.
Although I personally think you're right on the mark there that with land use issues. I mean, the NIMBYism element, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges for developing more affordable housing in this city. And a lot of that, in my mind, my experience sitting in front of community boards and listening to people's concerns tends to stem from infrastructure. They're worried with people moving in, what that's going to mean for their subway stop, for their bus capacity, for their school capacity. and things of that nature. And then from there, when you talk to the agencies that manage each of those, it's, well, it's the process is very reactionary. If the people move in, then we'll build a bigger school. And so going back to one of your questions, Sharon, what partnerships are critical for post-pandemic world? Tom touched on this a little bit. It's really, I think, a better coordination between all the different agencies, groups within the agencies, and the planners and the electeds. If we could somehow get past each of them being the gatekeeper of their element, and I know it's very idealistic, but think about how we can really be working together to strategically plan some of these endeavors. Right now, the repair of the sewers in New York is a very patchwork process. And it's, I think, the incoming potential mayor, made a really good comment on one of his speeches. He said, how is it that we have a whole department focused on having New Yorkers eat healthier food, and then we're serving cheeseburgers at school lunches? It's that type of bigger, broader, coordinated thinking that I think is going to be important to making that difference.
Thank you, Mr. Orcus. I think we have time for one more question. There's one in here that I'm hoping that Chairman Russ would be able to touch on. I see I'm a huge supporter of the blueprint for NYCHA, but it is very clear that residents do not feel that they have been adequately engaged up to this point. What is the engagement strategy going to look like going forward in post-pandemic New York?
Thank you. Well, we have heard that. I don't necessarily agree with the comment, because we had a really difficult time with COVID. I think folks wanted to be in person and we couldn't be, but we talked to thousands of people on the town halls. We did hundreds of mailings. We had long discussions actually with the citywide resident group. And even though they did not in the end support us, we took all of their comments on how that whole plan should be structured. We reinforced resident rights. We reinforced the ability to go out and do alternative procurement. We embedded requirements for resident employment into the design. So, and I do think going forward, we may have an opportunity to reach people in a different way, and would really look forward to that. That could mean focusing on single properties or focusing on neighborhoods. And I think one of the things that has driven a lot of discussion is people are afraid of losing their housing. And anything that, even though this program is designed to increase the income available for our stock, I think people really worried about moving from one subsidy platform to another, even though it means a lot more money and a lot more flexibility, because they fear the loss of the apartments. They see many examples of housing being lost. I do think, though, that we have been clear from the start. We had a question on what constitutes affordable. That was defined too. There are strict definitions that HUD uses. We use the same: 80, 60, and 30% of area median income, for example. That's what we're building for with public housing. If you drop into 30% of area median, we have families that we house now who are making 17 to 20% of that number. That's roughly 16, 17, maybe 20,000 a year at best. So that's what we have to build for. And that requires deep subsidy and requires the kind of capital to renew the buildings, because the rents and subsidy alone will only support so much debt over time if we have to take on debt, that kind of thing. So I do think the other thing we want to emphasize is that, we're waiting too, in some ways, to see what might come from Washington in terms of infrastructure. Public housing is included in the reconciliation bill being discussed in the House. Those discussions are focused on an investment nationally of around $80 billion. This has never happened. There's nothing like this has happened. Maybe in 1937 it happened when but we have not had a discussion about recapitalizing the public housing program nationally since then. And we've kind of nibbled at the edges. So we expect if there's additional grant money, we'll be able to think about how we approach that and how we approach our residents to make sure they understand that they are involved. So we have a lot of deep resident engagement ideas for the planning. If we get money to reconstruct, we want folks to be involved in the selection of the professional firms that would work on these properties, as well as the construction firms, whatever we wind up with in terms of procurement relief, I hope, is that they're involved in those selections as well. So some of what we're thinking is dependent on the moment we're in. And we're in a moment that has not existed in the past 40 years, where we're actually talking about not only investing in public housing, but many of the other infrastructures that the other panelists mentioned as well. So I think we have a chance to engage with fresh eyes and fresh resources.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Chairman. In the last 5 minutes, as promised, we're just going to do sort of a last call, last wrap up. I'm going to ask Mr. Sutton, followed by Mr. Orcus, followed by Mr. Servo, and then back to Chairman Russ, Commissioner Torres Springer, and the last word I will ask from Senator Kavanagh.
Well, okay, starting with me, as Greg Russ mentioned, the investment in infrastructure is generational opportunity. This may not happen for another 40, 50 years. And we really need to take advantage of it. We really need to see how we can transform our cities, our counties, and our states, how we can do what we call, I believe President Biden called build better and be more inclusive. And I'm really excited about the opportunity. And I look forward to working with all the people on this call, and I'm really looking forward to working on some of these reimagined and transformative projects that's going to have a positive impact on the lives of Americans.
Mr. Orcus.
I mean, I think COVID and a lot of the impacts of climate change that we've been seeing over the last year have brought a few important things to light. One is that we've talked a lot about infrastructure that is traditionally roads and sewers and water and electric, but high-speed internet is really infrastructure and an essential component of people's lives right now. And that needs to be something that just gets pre-wired into all new buildings going forward. And I know the city and the state are working hard towards that. And similarly, if we are really going to move, we're in all of our buildings, we're moving to be all electric and trying to get as self-sufficient as possible on that side with PV arrays. But the electric, to get the electric grid really clean and away from fossil fuels is also going to take some really strong partnerships between the utility companies and the government. And I think those are probably two areas dealing with these big public-private giants out there, both on the energy side and on the internet side are places for us to focus. So.
Yeah, I think you'll hear a lot of similar things from all of us, but I think there's some uncertainty, right? Like about remote working and the impact of that on the city, and 70% of workers are going to be in some sort of hybrid work environment, 2 days on, 2 days off, or and that's going to have an impact across the city. So, but I do think this is like Michael and Spencer said, a once in a generation opportunity where you have infrastructure investment, federal infrastructure investment, where we can begin to redefine the relationship of all of that traditional infrastructure and the social infrastructure that makes New York City great. And if we start fixing bridges and highways and not address housing and all these other social ideas, I think we're going to be in a similar place going forward. So and I think that requires some policy changes. It requires some changes in how we select firms that deliver projects who are providing a more innovative solution around positive social and health outcomes to delivering those projects in an innovative way through design, build, and other methods. So I'm hopeful that we can collaborate and really shape those decisions and the way we deliver this infrastructure going forward.
Sharon, am I next? Great. I do think we understand what the potential is. I would say because I thought Michael's comment about labor is particularly telling. And I believe at least for NYCHA's side, I would be thinking about opening what I'm calling a labor recruitment office at each property, that folks that are looking for work can meet up with those who have work. But and then if we have a training path to get from the place where they are now to and I'm not just talking about trades. Not trying to but we need professionals as well. We need engineers, architects, environmental folks who understand the move from to electrification is going to create all kinds of jobs. So that recruitment of labor, I think, is going to be essential if we're going to be successful. And that would mean, if we think about these projects, these are 10, maybe 15 years of activity if the funds come through. So you could start recruiting in middle school for kids to graduate and then move on as interns or other ways. So there's potential here to really not just change our buildings, our properties, and our city, but change these lives at the ground level and make that path work. I think that's essential if we're going to do this correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner?
I'll close with something similar, which is, this is an enormously disruptive time. We're clearly all trying to figure out ways to maximize the value of the capital dollars and other financing sources that are available to us. It's some of it is rocky and difficult, but I'm hopeful that this sort of tenor of this conversation holds, which is to maximize all the different kinds of benefits that we can get out of infrastructure investment. And I was going to say that, our big partnership goal is to work with the contractors who do the work in the city to make sure that they're equipped to hire the right kinds of workers, to Greg's point, and give opportunities to people that don't have opportunities, and also to make sure that they get paid and that they're in a position to succeed in building our projects, because that allows us to deliver. And I think we're very excited to work with a lot of different partners, and I would certainly include the state legislature. And Senator Kavanagh and I have had some good conversations recently about an agenda for improving our tools for project delivery, and we're intending to follow through on that.
I guess I get the last word. I see Ralph is here to get us out of here, so I'll try to keep it brief. I just want to, zoom back to like the 30,000 foot level. I mean, this conversation, I think, demonstrates one of the reasons that a lot of us in New York are very optimistic. We have extraordinary capacity in New York at the level of local government, city agencies that are able to think very big and deliver large scale projects, which is there's basically no other local government in America that has that kind of capacity at the local level. We have tremendous partners in the public and private sector who have, really an ability to innovate and ability to use resources. New York, there was a time in the early 90s, New York was spending more money on local money on housing than the next 50 largest localities in America combined. There was a time when we felt the need to rebuild on a large scale because a lot of our city had been, reduced to rubble through abandonment and fires. And we achieved that kind of renewal. People have talked about the more recent fiscal crises, but really there was a time when cities like New York really were perceived to be going down the tubes. This is another time when people are having that conversation. I'm optimistic because there is a broad consensus that, first of all, we have the capacity, but also that we should invest the resources. In the chat, I was accused of being a socialist engaging in class warfare. If you're having conversation about solving big problems and you're not accused of being something terrible or excessive, you're probably not doing it right. But I actually believe that the general public does not want to have 90,000 people homeless at any given time in New York City, and in New York State rather, because we're not investing enough resources and not getting the policies and the programs right. And I think we have an ability to do that. And it really is an unprecedented moment where there's so much federal money coming. There's so much of a desire to reset based on our experience with COVID and climate change. And I'm really optimistic. And again, I thank city and state for bringing us all together and having a great conversation today.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time for this very illuminating and thoughtful discussion on the trajectory of post-pandemic New York. Thanks to all who are tuning in online and here in the webinar. We've got hundreds in the room right here. Thank you for tuning in and staying engaged and amplifying voices. And of course, thank you to City and State for fueling the conversation at this critical once-in-a-generation moment, an opportunity, as was mentioned in the past hour. Up next, I know we have a distinguished panel, a couple of distinguished panels. I owe the next panel a good 6 minutes. Apologies, forgive me, my fault. Back to you, Ralph.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and the whole panel for helping us have such an important conversation today. Next, we have Rachel Loeb, Managing Director at Cozen O'Connor, moderating our second panel on rethinking New York's transportation systems. Rachel.
Hi, it's Katie Schwab from Cozen O'Connor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Katie. I knew this. I saw that this was.
No worries.
Repeating Rachel's name.
Rachel. Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, Katie, I apologize so much.
It's totally okay. It's totally okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you, and I'm happy to be here. I'm Katie Schwab. I'm the Managing Director of the New York practice at Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies. And just for anyone who doesn't know, we're a government relations practice, a subsidiary of Cozen O'Connor, which is an Am Law 100 law firm with offices across the country and in Canada and the UK as well. Our practice is here in New York. We also have government relations offices in Philadelphia, Washington, Richmond, and Chicago. So it is my pleasure to moderate this panel on rebuilding the transportation infrastructure in the coming years as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. We do have a terrific panel, and I'll just get us started by saying that it certainly goes without saying that mobility is the lifeblood of our densely populated 24/7 region. And it's really that our complex and robust transportation system is what has historically made everything possible here in New York. Since March of 2020, we've experienced the overarching impacts of COVID-19 in the transportation system in a variety of different ways. Certainly, there was a precipitous decline in the use of public transit. There was an increased use of private passenger vehicles in places where we hadn't seen such intensive use before. Severe revenue shortfalls were felt by public transit agencies across the region. There was an increased demand in sometimes surprising ways for alternative types of transportation. And there were many hardships felt among workers, vendors, and contractors who support the overall transportation industry. At the same time, the crisis did allow for some dramatic accomplishments, including the major reconstruction of LaGuardia Airport and some innovative ride sharing and micromobility pilots. So on today's panel, we do have the convening of some wonderful leaders from different sectors of the industry to discuss not only the challenges of the last 18 months, but also some of the innovations and opportunities and how their experiences will help us shape the recovery moving forward. So I'm happy just to do a brief introduction of everyone who's here today. First, we have Phil Eng. As you may know, Phil is the president of the Long Island Railroad, which is the largest commuter railroad in the nation. They serve over 89 million riders every year. Phil has a long career in public service. He graduated from Cooper Union, started as a junior engineer at New York State DOT. His diverse experience makes him exactly the kind of leader that we need in public transportation today. He has worked in bridges, technology, payment systems, construction. We're delighted to have him here today. We also will be joined very shortly by Adonis Rodriguez. He's been chairing a very active transportation committee hearing this morning, but he'll be here in shortly. As you may know, he's the council member from the 10th district, which is Washington Heights and Inwood. He's a passionate advocate for alternative means of transportation and for serving underserved workers and commuters. And he'll be ending his service in the council this year due to term limits. So many of us are looking forward to seeing what his next steps might be. Mike Finley is here today. Mike is the CEO of Boingo, which is a wireless connectivity company working with many partners to bring Wi-Fi and 5G solutions to the public. Mike's responsible for all of the company's strategic direction, and he's leading the company into the 5G future. He has decades of experience with industry leaders and household names like Nextel, Sprint, Verizon, and others. So again, very happy to have him on this panel. Veronica Smith works with iCore Strategies, but she honed her skills working with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, doing community and external relations. She worked with restoring the George Construction, George Washington Bridge Bus Station, and the Port's Master Plan. So she's also fluent in Spanish. Glad to have her here today. Paul Suey is the co-founder and head of rideshare and electric vehicle infrastructure for Revel. Many of us learned about Revel by their eye-catching blue scooters, which I think launched in Brooklyn back around 2018. But Revel actually has a much more big mission. They're very committed to electric vehicles generally and electric vehicle infrastructure. They also are located in many cities across the country now. Delighted to have him here. And finally, Jerry Jannetty. Jerry is the Senior Vice President and Northeast Business Manager for Transportation and Infrastructure at WSP USA. WSP, I'm sure you know, is a storied engineering firm. It has roots tracing back about 130 years. And Jerry, for decades, has been involved in major infrastructure and design projects in New York. So again, a terrific panelist. So thank you all for being here. And we'll get started with some questions. So I thought we'd start out with talking about the importance of connectivity in the transportation infrastructure. With the explosion of remote work, and the idea of connectivity is certainly not a luxury anymore. In our transit systems, equipment and facilities are increasingly sophisticated, and certainly our riders are demanding seamless connectivity. What are some efforts that are underway to support this evolution in how we live and move about? And what can we expect to see across the various systems as we move forward?
Katie, maybe I'll jump on that question. And thank you to City and State for having me here. It's fantastic to be part of this panel. You talked a little bit about my background at State DOT. I'm now at Long Island Railroad. And I think really connectivity is something that has been vital even before the pandemic, with the remote working that is occurring. People and economies thrive on transportation that's reliable, that's robust, and meets their needs. And one of the things that I learned when I first came to Long Island Railroad is that the ridership wanted to have real-time information. They wanted to have accurate information. And the information to them gave them the power to make informed decisions. And I think that's important, whether you're driving, whether you're taking Long Island Railroad, whether you're taking a bus, whether you're biking, walking, et cetera. What is going on out there to help you make those decisions? What we've been doing at Long Island Railroad, and Mike Finley may talk a little bit about it, but is making sure that across our entire infrastructure, people have the ability to connect with their cell phones or to Wi-Fi, because that connectivity is vital to them. And then that gives them the ability to have real-time information. For us at Long Island Railroad, that was where the train is that train approaching the platform? Is it delayed? And in the COVID world, how many people on those trains, how many people in those cars. And we've been able to do that. We've taken the information and we've been providing real-time information, not only to the riders, but to our operation folks to make informed decisions. And all of that is actually proving fruitful because last year in June, we rolled out a new train time app where our customers who use it, and if you have a chance to go look at it, I think it's the best in the world. Rail agencies from across the globe have called us to ask us how we've been able to provide this information. You can look at the car in real time as it's approaching the train, car by car, see how many people are on it. You can see what we've historically been carrying in the past week to see which trains to pick. But that information now is available. And what we're seeing is even though our ridership is down and that we actually, Friday was the heaviest since the pandemic, 150,000 riders on Friday compared to 300,000+ pre-pandemic. But the use of this train time app is 70% of our riders are using it versus under 40% before. And that's because it's real-time information, and that gives them the ability to make informed decisions if there's a disturbance, if there's an issue, or if they want to take a different train just because of the crowding perhaps on one car or another train. So that's something that is giving confidence, and that's bringing people back to the trains.
Yeah, Katie, Mike Finley here. I'm gonna add on. First of all, great to see you, Phil. And thank you to City and State for having Boingo and myself here today. I'll give Phil a lot of credit and the MTA and LIR for really being forward thinkers and modernizing transportation. We see the same thing with the Port Authority, with Rick and his team there. Underlying all of it is connectivity. And as I think Phil was highlighting, one of the things that we at Boingo have done is, we're an agnostic, neutral host converged network builder. So we build licensed networks with the operators. We build unlicensed networks for Wi-Fi, and now CBRS is a new technology that's come. And one of the things that's happened with COVID and the pandemic is it's really fast forwarded a lot of applications. I'll give Phil and his team credit. The Train Time app is, a world-renowned app. He's described already the many uses and what people are gaining from that. But having connectivity available where the end users want it is really important to that as well. So that's the connectivity that we're building. We're building with the various transportation providers in New York. And then also we've been able to fast forward some capabilities. One of the things that I think the wireless industry historically has always talked about, the next G and the next application and the next capability. And although it's been there, COVID has really kind of fast forwarded some of these. So biometrics is now playing a key role. People want touchless, contactless type connectivity as well. So the Port Authority has launched some biometrics in the Newark Airport at the E-Gate. So it's completely touchless, contactless entry onto a plane, very fast, efficient, as well as contactless concessions, where people can have their concessions delivered to them, or they can get them without anybody touching it, if you will. So we're seeing that not just in transportation, but obviously in big stadiums and where you get lots of people coming together. But I think I'll just close with just congratulating Phil and his team, and really all of the New York transportation entities for being ahead of the game, thinking ahead, and they're enabling connectivity the same way we do we build networks for the future while we're building them today.
Do you think there are other opportunities for more sort of amenity type services that could be implemented in the transit systems here to help drive ridership back up to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, Katie, when you talk about amenities, everything that we've been doing here at Long Island Railroad and my sister agencies at MTA is about focusing on the customers and what their needs are. A lot of the information that we have is not only in the palm of your hand on these types of devices now, but it's also now going directly to the announcements that are being made in our stations. When a train is pulling in, that's same data that we are providing to our riders. If they're not looking at their phone, and we don't necessarily, connectivity is great, but sometimes it's good to disconnect. But we also now translate it to where the messaging that's on the platform is telling you there's more room at the back of a train or things of that nature. I know in transit, you're hearing announcements with regards to which stations are accessible and where the elevators are within those stations. That's very important because it's hard enough to transverse a system, but when you need the extra accessibility, if you platform in the wrong place, it's that much harder. On our app, we've mapped all of our stations, all of our platforms. We want our riders to know where the elevators are. We want our riders to know where the ramps are, because in that case, they're going to position themselves more properly on the train and in stations. Those types of things are important. All of that data is things that we're using as well, because the feedback comes back to us to allow us to continually improve the amenities. And it's again, a lot goes back to information, making people more comfortable. A lot of things that kept people from using the railroad is they just didn't believe the reliability of it. And I remember in the very early days, they'd say, your platform signs would say the train is on time, and yet the train was not coming. Now you can actually see where the train is on the map on your phone in real time. So those types of things, those amenities, it's proving to be the reason that people were riding the railroad in record numbers before the pandemic, and I'm confident that they'll be coming back. And that's a great thing for Long Island's economy, New York's economy, local downtowns, businesses, because like I said, reliable transportation, whichever mode you choose, is important for all of us.
Yeah, completely agree. Great. Anyone else have more to chime in? All right, we can move on to the next topic, which is congestion pricing. It's been on the horizon for an awfully long time. As we know, it was stalled in Washington for some time, but now it's been dislodged. Governor Hochul has signaled that she is firmly committed to supporting congestion pricing. And so the hearings have begun. I believe there was one last night, the first one. But since the enabling legislation was passed in 2019, we certainly have seen a lot of changes in the city. The streetscape has changed substantially. We have robust sort of open streets program. The rideshare industry has matured. The consumers have begun relying on deliveries very much since COVID, and electric vehicles have entered the picture in a bigger way than maybe was anticipated at the time. So just with all of those things in mind, and as the public hearing process begins, what are the issues that policymakers should be considering as they start to shape the program and roll it forward? Seems to me that Councilmember Rodriguez, welcome. You'd be a good person to begin to answer this question. Also, Paul Suey, I think you may have some special expertise, but I welcome all of your comments on this.
Thank you. And I'm sorry for joining this panel late, but I was also ending the hearing that we had today of the Committee of Transportation with other committees, where we had the MTA talking about how was the city prepared with the last flooding that we have, which is also connected to why we need a congestion price. Look, there's no doubt that we cannot sustain the level of debt that the MTA is dealing with in order to upgrade the signal system, in order to invest on the safety, in order to continue expanding, our trains through other area. Even though I know that so far, the amount of dollars that can be raised from the congestion price, $1.3 billion, will be used for the MTA to be able to get all the money through loan or other process that they need in order to have what we need in order to continue running the train on time, but also to upgrade the train station. Reality is that we have seen those flooding as a result of all infrastructure that we have outside and inside the stations. What I feel that will continue being an important issue related to congestion prices, how will the local New Yorkers who live close, especially those in Brooklyn, that they use the bridge more often than others, will see the benefit of the investing in public transportation? How can we also let New Yorkers to know that there's a level of control of that money. We cannot give us a blank check to the MTA and to the new structure that we have created. New York City needs to expand the number of votes in that new structure that will be making decision on how the money will be used. So I feel it's going to be, I think that New York State, from the previous governor to the leaders at the Assembly and the Senate and the members of legislation in both chambers, and they were big supporters of congestion price. Our problem was with that guy that represented the right wing of this nation, former President Trump, that tended to give a quote to our political system. He was the one who hijacked the decision that we have made using some pieces related to the environmental study, something that we know that had been done. So I'm happy that we're moving forward. I think that this is a moment where the MTA, we need this money more than ever, because not only we need to upgrade the stations, but also we need to continue having the resources to upgrade the signal system. We need to be sure that also New Yorkers get to see the benefit of those, or the new payment that they will have when they can come to Manhattan. I myself, as you know, have been one of the first ones supporting congestion price. I believe that we had to create a condition where more New Yorkers put the car away. I'm one of those 1.4 million New Yorkers that had a car. But I feel that in order for us to, have a plan that we can see that numbers of New Yorkers be reduced from 1.4 million that own vehicle to 1 million, we need to run the train and the buses faster, safer. We need more resources. The MTA is dealing with a big debt, and I think the congestion price definitely will make a big difference.
I think just to add to that and to give everyone a brief perspective on, or just brief background on Revel, so you understand where my perspective on this issue comes from. So Revel as a company, everything that we do, what we're really focused on is driving decarbonization in major cities like New York. We're a New York-based company. Our goal is to really drive increased access to electric vehicles to all New Yorkers. When it comes to congestion pricing, I think at the most basic level, obviously congestion pricing is about congestion. So when we think about congestion signals that an electric vehicle should see versus a gas car, we think that everyone should see the same signal. But there's really a unique opportunity here to use this as one of the strongest or best policy tools to drive electrification in the city. But just a massive problem that we have right now as a city, you look at the vehicles that are on city streets, whether they're consumer vehicles, whether they're for-hire vehicles, whether they're fleet vehicles of any kind, they're all fossil fuel gas-powered vehicles. So we have a major challenge of how do we drive the electrification of mobility, of transportation in general. So you really have this dual challenge of we need less vehicles, we need to send the right signals, we need to make the right steps towards congestion, but we also need to understand what can we do to really drive electrification and how can we do that much faster than current estimates. So one thing that I think we've seen in London, who has traditionally been a leader around congestion pricing, is seeing exemptions around EVs for a certain time limited period. What that allows you to do is it sends signals to consumers, it sends signals to EV operators to have a reduced cost for some short time frame, whether it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, to try to make that change, incentivize those consumers and buyers to make that shift to electric. But in the long term, again, you're still sending the same signals, you're still collecting the same revenue from that operator, but you're trying to use this congestion program as a tool to also drive electrification more quickly. So I think just in general, I think the goal that I see, or the mentality that needs to, or that I would recommend just in general, is thinking about the dual challenge of congestion and electrification and the opportunities there when shaping the program.
And Paul, are there other infrastructure challenges with rolling out electric vehicles that should be addressed in conjunction with this?
There are massive issues. I think one of the core challenges that we see right now, being an infrastructure developer, operating infrastructure, there's a massive challenge with building infrastructure ahead of demand. So the more that you can incentivize the quick adoption, quick uptake of EVs, whether through fleets or otherwise, the more economic it is for an infrastructure developer like ourselves, someone that's actually operating an EV fast charging station, to build out these stations in a way that's actually profitable. So the more that you can have demand coming alongside of the build out of infrastructure, I think the more infrastructure you'll see and the faster you'll see it being built.
Maybe if it's all right for me to
Yes,
just
please.
weigh in a little bit, I'd like to build off of what the councilman mentioned and what Paul has been talking about. And, you know, the big component of congestion pricing as well is to get people out of their cars if possible, right? At the same time, make sure mass transportation options are there. Because if we want people out of their cars, we can't put them on if mass transportation is not reliable. And if we want the funding to be provided to mass transportation, we need to show that we can do things differently, that we could deliver in a more cost-effective manner, delivering projects, I think, as the MTA has been demonstrating over the last few years, that we could do things on time and on budget. And that's what we've been doing here at Long Island Railroad, and I know my sister agencies as well have been working on those things. A lot of the mega projects that we've been working on, Long Island Railroad third track, on time, on budget, $2.6 billion project. And that's an example of a robust public outreach that you can move a project that people didn't think would happen. And I think congestion pricing, the public outreach thing is going to be very vital to that. But then tying into, you know, how do we do things differently? I'm proud of the fact that just a few months ago, Long Island Railroad announced that, you know, we're doing a product test agreement to convert our electric M7 fleet to battery electric. And what does that do for us? It allows us to look at the future of our diesel territory that is not powered right now and brings it to within reach, because that area would have been $18 billion or over $17 billion of electrification and decades of capital program to actually do. Taking a look at battery electric, first in North America for a commuter railroad to look at the potential, brings this actually to within our lifetime. And for much less dollars, and actually much less impact to those communities where perhaps electrification would be performed. Imagine just the Oyster Bay branch, 13 miles of non-electric territory. We would need a major substation every mile along to electrify. And what does that change to the character of the community? So I think what Paul talked about with, you know, looking at other types of, you know, EV and things of that nature is something that we're embracing here at MTA and Long Island Railroad. And certainly, you know, finding ways to deliver things differently, more cost effectively, but makes meaningful benefits to the community and the economy. It's a major focus of ours.
Right. And finding ways to continue to build those partnerships seems so important to, you know, leverage the investment by one into another, you know, benefit for the public is so valuable. So it's great. Council member, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I just think that I go back into with a new relationship between the city and the state. If there's something that the new governor can do, is to expand the numbers of New Yorkers being appointed by the mayor to the Traffic Mobility Review Board. I think at the time when this board was created, it was the relationship between the state and the city was bad. Therefore, we got screwed. And at the end of the day, we will be witness of a system that decades after, we will, as the resident of the city, will be the one that will be paying most of those congestion price, but those who will make decision for us will not necessarily be the mayor. So I hope again that it will make a big difference, because this board will be making major decisions on how that $1.3 billion will be invested. And one of the things that I've been clear to the beginning with in the whole process, as we were working together with the advocate group and legislators, is that the local resident has to see the benefit. I believe that it is important to reduce the numbers of cars, but I don't want to make a plan that is benefit the rich. I don't want to deal with the perception that someone who lives in the outer borough area feel that here we are turning downtown Manhattan exclusively for a particular group of people, which is not the intention, but everything is about perception. So I support, let's say, Fifth Avenue to be turned walkable from 59 to 42nd Street. I believe that we need to continue, creating our transportation system, one that should be efficient, one should be safe. And as a chairman of the Transportation Committee, going through the whole process of budget, we also know that the billions of dollars that the MTA has in debt is too large and it's difficult for them to deal with that. So this is not only about they will have 1.3 billion that they will be able to raise the money. This is about what value that 1.3 billion dollars will give to the MTA for them to plan with around $11 billion additional every year. So again, I hope that with the new relationship, we will see a expansion of the numbers of the Traffic Mobility Review Board, giving the city more numbers, another 2 or 3 more members. And I also hope that, I'm a big proponent, of electrical vehicle. But we also have the yellow taxi. Yellow taxi will be asking to say we want to be exempt because they also been screwed in the last couple of years, and they will feel if we enter Midtown, we should not be subject to pay the congestion price. So I think that this board will have to review a lot of the suggestions, but the most important thing is that we continue giving the value to the congestion price and thanking Biden for allowing, at the federal level and with the support of Senator Schumer and Nadler and the other New York City congestion congressional delegation to be a voice on support of this congestion price that, again, was stuck because of the former president. But hopefully now we can move forward.
Well, I do think it's an interesting time politically, right? We have, obviously a new governor. We're moving into a transition period in the city with new leadership. And obviously the new president, relatively new president. So I think there may be opportunities, for this shift in people and personalities to open up new ways of doing business. And I don't know if any of the panelists would like to weigh in on what that means. I think, Veronica, you may even have some thoughts too, having worked at the Port Authority, because we haven't even addressed our neighbors to the west, but New Jersey is also an important player, especially given the importance of federal funding in the equation of so much of our major infrastructure and how that matters to the region.
Yes, so first I'd just like to say thank you for allowing me to speak on this panel, and Katie, thank you for setting that context for us at the top of the panel. But as far as the question about the prospect of new leadership, I think my general sense is cautious optimism, because when we think about revamping New York transportation systems, policymakers need to ensure that the community's input is a valued key piece of the puzzle. So I'm really heartened by hearing Councilman Rodriguez's comments as prior, because it really is about the community. And none of these plans, none of them will succeed without the community's buy-in and without their continued support. So that said, I do think that this new class has their heart in the right place. So I am cautiously optimistic that these plans will move forward with real input of real world stakeholders, not just some of the folks here that we're really, really experts and we're really keyed into these issues, but the day-to-day folks that need to get from point A to B to C, we need to hear the feedback from those folks and use that to inform these plans.
Why don't we, I want to shift gears a little bit. I know, Councilmember, you just were talking about Tropical Storm Ida. Jerry, I think you may have some real good insights into this, but I know I was certainly shocked by the impacts that this sudden storm had on the transportation system and on the city as a whole, the tragic loss of life. It just was so startling, notwithstanding how many warnings we've all had about the likelihood of sudden and severe storms and climate change. But I just would like to put it out to the panel. I mean, does our recent experience mean we need a wholesale review of our infrastructure? Have we done sufficient planning for the future and for the modifications that need to be made? What do you think? We also know, just given the experience of the pandemic, that health and cleanliness are more important perhaps than ever had been considered in the past. So what is sort of your view on infrastructure planning and need for repair moving forward?
Maybe I'll start with that.
Sure.
Right, Katie? Sure. First, it's an honor to be here with my fellow distinguished panelists, and thank you, City and State, for allowing me to be on the panel today. With regard to Ida, I just want to express my, sincere, just thoughts and prayers with those families that were so impacted by the flooding. I would say that the infrastructure bill has the potential, like so many have said before me, to be transformative. And it's my sincere hope that the focus will be on shovel-worthy projects, not just simply shovel-ready. And what we need is to provide meaningful investment with long-term economic growth that satisfies a couple of our future needs. We all have been thinking differently, not just about Ida, but being future ready for whatever the future brings. And what do I mean by that? We are stewards of our children's future. We should be concerned about several areas. One is climate, two is our society, three is technology, and four are our limited resources. Starting with climate, future weather will be different, and it will just continue to get different over time. I was a couple of weeks ago in Idaho, and I didn't see a mountain because of all the smoke in the air that was just being carried from a neighboring state. Consider how the project will function in a future of more extreme weather and water shortages in other parts of the country. What we experienced with Ida was greater than a 500-year storm. The rain was more than Sandy. Our frequency standards appear to be out of sorts, where our 100-year storm appears to be happening annually. So therefore, our definitions probably need to be changed. From a societal standpoint, we've, over the past year, mental disability appears to be growing, and not just in our city, but across the country and the world. Yet most schemes that we develop on our projects really seem to address physical disabilities only. End users demand more social value and empathy from companies such as mine and more vocal schemes that impact them. And there is an increase in urbanism, just our older societies, and trends to loneliness, or just a couple others. From a technology standpoint, there is a new mobility from fast growth of electric vehicles in really changing our public transport, and the pace of change and the need to build resilience in some of our ideas just becomes increasingly important. There are fast changing work patterns from commuting every day to working from home, and different methods of construction, like modular construction, seems to be changing our construction industry. And lastly, our resources. And Paul talked a lot about the impacts in the long term to our greenhouse gas emissions and how they need to be cut, and considering a future economy that may be a zero carbon economy, which would be just a wonderful objective. So more than just Ida, we just have to consider our future.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Katie.
Katie.
Katie, this is Mike. Thanks, Jerry. I'll just comment maybe just pretty specifically on the connectivity side. Obviously, when these types of events happen, communication is critical. So, we're constantly building in redundancies and capabilities in advance. It's hard to predict a tropical storm, Hurricane Ida. It's hard to predict some other types of events. But what we can predict is that they'll happen. There'll be these types of emergencies and crisis. And so the technology and the connectivity is really important. So that's why we're really focused on the converged aspect of connectivity. We build networks that not only have licensed spectrum that we work with the operators, the Wi-Fi side and the unlicensed side, CBRS, as I mentioned a little earlier. And then we monitor these networks 7x24 by 365. So in the case of Ida, obviously we were on high alert long before, as it was kind of going throughout the country. You know, we're on all of the military bases around the country too, and providing connectivity to our troops. So it's really important that our networks stay up and available. So there's a lot of work that goes in advance to prepare for those. But yeah, as you all know, especially, and we all know in New York, it's what happens when they hit. And we rallied together. We didn't have any outages, which was great, but a lot of that had to do with a lot of the pre-planning, a lot of the work with, you know, people like Phil and his team and the Port Authority and Rick and his team. As far as, you know, COVID, that's actually helped enable some of that as well, because, you know, the cleanliness, the telehealth, having connectivity available to be able to support those types of needs, little things in some ways like autonomous cleaning or robotic cleaning in a lot of these big facilities, connectivity is enabling that. So the key is obviously in times of emergency to have connectivity. We do a lot of work in advance of that with all of our partners to make sure that it's there. But you know, I think from the infrastructure side, the connectivity side, that's basically where you start at that foundation.
That's a very good point. And I do think it's notable that we didn't hear about the failure of communication systems, right? We maybe heard about people didn't have early enough notice, or they weren't paying attention maybe early enough, but there did seem to be nice redundant systems in place that didn't go down, which is a tribute to those systems.
Yes.
Yeah.
A good thing is that today, like we had a hearing, as I was saying, where we had both the Office of Emergency Management, the resiliencies and sanitation and others, and then MTA. And they all agree. First of all, the MTA share that they have created a task force that already been meeting to go over their own experience that they have, what worked and what didn't work, where do they fail, how can they be better prepared. And knowing that now the level of water getting into the station is something different, and that they have to be prepared, and also where and how, you know, how important it is to see the infrastructure plan to pass in DC, so that from those $3 trillion, some of the money should come to the city, especially to projects directly connected to upgrade the infrastructure that is more than 100 years old. So I feel that, you know, we can go over and over and look at business as usual, but at the same time, all of us have to take responsibility, because we have created this system. You know, many of us have been around the MTA for so many decades, and we have seen how we had not invest the necessary resource to upgrade it. Or also we had not neither made those private contractors to be accountable, you know, to do project on time with less money. Like, I feel that, you know, definitely the last two flooding, the way of how we have so much water had to prepare us for the worst in the near future. But we also had to learn and go back to Sandy. You know, there have been two projects related to the money directly from FEMA, like the Coney Island one, that only 50% of that project has been done in 10 years. The 207 radar in my own community has not been finished yet. So there's something that we had to learn also on how, and we know that we had to deal with a lot of procurement, but also when we compare ourselves with other cities like in London and others that had to follow the same level of procurement, we are doing projects too expensive, much expensive than others. It takes longer. And I feel that, yes, we need to bring resources to upgrade the infrastructure, but also we have to have the vision to take the city to a higher level of expectation than what we have right now.
No, it's in the last panel. I know there was some discussion about procurement reform, and there have been opportunities to test things out, and there are strategies that can be implemented, but finding the will to use them on a broader basis is difficult, right? It's been a challenge over the years, and I think that now is really a time when it needs to be pushed. I don't know, you know, as we begin to see procurement and infrastructure investment picking up, and with the prospect of the federal money, being, at our doorstep. I mean, are there strategies that you would recommend for having agencies collaborate more effectively across boundaries, across jurisdictions, and choosing the best projects, those shovel-worthy projects, as you said, Jerry, that should move forward really for the maximum public benefit?
We have to use the talented individual that we have in the city. We don't have to create a task force to identify international individuals that come and tell us what to do. We have Michael NYU, we have CUNY, we have SUNY, we have other people that it's a matter for us at the government, at the state and the city level with the MTA to identify a group of experts that we can sit in the room and let's take their guidance, because I think that there's a lot of New Yorkers that they have bold idea on how to deal with the infrastructure that we have that will build more than 100 years ago.
Right, true.
We have a lot of knowledge right here in the industry that works in New York that has delivered projects differently, quicker, and doing it looking long-term as well as what are the short-term needs. We really should build on that. And I think what we've seen over the last few years is for private sector and public sector and the community and the public to kind of all provide feedback into this. And a lot of it goes to the best practices that we've seen in terms of engaging those that we would rely on as an owner to build the project, to design the project, and letting their knowledge and expertise come to the forefront. And at the same time, then as the owner, factor in what we need as the operator to support those projects. And I think that's where you see those projects delivered most on time and on budget. It's where, an operator owner makes a change to the contract and that throws off the schedule, that throws off their means and methods. So I think a lot of what we've done using alternative procurement has made a difference. There's a place and time for that, and there's a place and time for other types of procurements that don't put as much risk on those sectors that are doing the work for us. And then obviously it's a matter of how do you make sure that the private sector industry has the resources to support all of these projects that are ongoing, and how do we message that to the public so they know how best to navigate these projects, right? Because as you're doing work, services have to be altered to support the work, and how do you do that in a way that continues to support the economy, support businesses, and allow people to have that movement that makes living in New York so important to us, and rewarding. But we have a lot of experience, and we really should be building off of that.
I see we just have a couple more minutes. And so I think maybe what we'll do is just go around to the panelists. I think that our last 18 months experience has definitely prevented everyone from doing business as usual. It's been incredibly disruptive. And so if you just give a couple of minutes on how has this really changed, how you've looked at your operations and what kind of opportunities has it provided? How will you do things differently? And what do you think is the most important strategy for helping recover and bring kind of operations in the region and the transportation system back to a robust, thriving ecosystem that we're all looking forward to seeing in place again? Start with you.
I'll chime in here.
Awesome.
I think that stakeholders that are most connected to these policy decisions, like elected officials and activists and advocates, do have a renewed sense of urgency to address some of these infrastructure needs. But more broadly, I do not find that the community at large has a real awareness of things like fair policy, of things like micromobility options, or even like a baseline understanding of congestion pricing. So I think we, as folks that are in this industry, need to do much more to educate and to make sure that there's an awareness on behalf of the public, on behalf of the community, so that their insights, their lived experiences are included in these plans. Because I do find, and no disrespect to anybody here, but I do find that some of these plans are very fancy and very, very top level, But if you ask a real world New Yorker, an essential worker, the elderly, young families, the disabled, how does this impact you? That's what I really want to hear. And that's what I really want to see as part of these plans, right? So I think we have to do much more, and we're getting better, absolutely getting better in terms of public engagement and really ensuring that the public and communities and neighborhoods have a real understanding of how these transportation plans and policies are going to impact their daily lives, but we can do more, much more.
It's a really good point.
That's one,
right.
The community is the stakeholder, number one.
Right.
And ultimately that's the person that we're trying to serve here.
Right. And how do you plan for, how do you plan for real life in a Zoom world, right? There is a fundamental
that requires more effort, but it's worthwhile in the long run.
Right.
So
a really good point.
I'll jump in and follow. So, the world that we live in at Boingo and in connectivity, we're always looking ahead because it never stands still. 3G, 4G, 5G, the Wi-Fi evolution to 6 and 6E. We're always building for the future. As I mentioned earlier, we build redundancy and we also build ahead. I will tell you, I think the question about COVID and what we've learned, in New York, we only missed a week of building out networks right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it really highlights both to our team and all of the people and contractors that we work with in New York to stay engaged. Some of that was, we had a lot of opportunities to build out networks in newer places that in some cases in the transportation systems weren't as heavily utilized as they had been before. But we also needed to keep the networks up and running. And I think one of the things in the wireless industry we're very good at is talking about all these things that are going to happen in the future, autonomous driving and telehealth and a number of contactless types of technologies, robotics, autonomous cleaning. And really COVID brought to life all of those things and brought them fast forward. And it really, I'll just highlight, I think the leadership in New York is as forward thinking and is focused on in the cases of the transportation centers, the end user, but also the citizens of New York. So I think it's a great credit to the leadership in New York, and we're honored to work with them.
I think that beside what my two colleagues have said, I can add that, we will never, I think that we will live and a new generation will come and they still will be studying our experience during COVID. We never thought that we we're going to be living this experience. We never thought that we we're going to be walking through Times Square and seeing like the area being shut down or taking the train. And sometimes you were the only person and during the rush hour. So I feel that, being in the street during those months last year from the beginning, distributing food, one of the experience that I see is that not all New Yorkers have the luxury to kind of work to the city and have their house in the home turn of the Hudson Valley. Not everyone is able to live in a 5,000 square feet. And I feel that my theory is that anyone can die from COVID, but most people who die were those who have pre-health condition. And there were people who live in area where asthma is a big issue because they live around the Cross Bronx, around a lot of truck that is contaminating the area. I also saw how even some people, and nothing bad with that, those who work hard and had the resources, good that they were able to take the children and experience their educational experience outside the big farm in Pennsylvania or other places. But also we had to, as New Yorkers that always had compassion, we also had to take this experience to learn from what happened. When we decided to shut it down the train, it was not only to clean the trains, it was also to save money. And we forgot that during those times, there was workers that they work at deli, that they work at restaurants, that they work in supplying the supermarkets. And I think that, again, from looking at the human part, not necessarily limited to those that we saw living. All of us has a friend or family member that we lost because of COVID. But being able to leave this nightmare in the last couple of months, and still a lot of work had to be done to defeat this COVID-19. I think one, Transportation is a key issue. We had to continue running our transportation. We also had to learn from, I know, area that we have in New York City, such as the area that are representing Inwood. We got Tandy Napoli, the state controller, that he did a study like 4 years ago. And he found out that the average resident of Inwood, they had to travel an hour and a half to go to work. So we had to learn from that. Not everyone live in the Upper West Side, live in the Upper East Side, that work 20 minutes away, that can go in a bike, that we have that group of percentage of New Yorkers who live on the poverty line. We have places where people, there's 3 generations of people living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And those people, they don't have the luxury, they don't have the privilege that I could have to say, I can work from my house, my staff can work from my house. So I think that they need to continue running transportation. They need to continue looking at technology. Is something that I hope that we can look at it. But most important, I hope that we can look at the human part on how people were suffering during this period and how we lost so many people, yes, because of the socioeconomic status that they belong to.
I know we're running out of time, so I'll quickly just add to what all my colleagues have said. You know, what I learned through this pandemic and even before is that we really need to be able to build public confidence in what we're looking to do and how we're looking to do it. Because at the end of the day, and I think Veronica said it well, it's about what improvements we're making for the public that we serve, the community at large. I mean, all of us, our friends, our families, we all want New York to be the place it is that it was for us, but we want it even more for our children and the future of future generations, right? So the ability to have that communication, listening, taking that feedback and making sure it gets factored in, but then the ability to make decisions when the time comes that is for the greater good, and being able to communicate that with folks. I think we've seen it wherever we've had successes, and even if the getting to the end was frustrating or challenging because of differing opinions, a lot of times, you know, I even remember a feedback hearing, if we knew what you were going to do when we were debating it, we never would have debated it so much. We would have, you know, we would have supported it sooner. So those are the types of things where we really need to have more transparency and build public trust. And that's not only just with the public, but even working across with our sister agencies where we need support, whether it's regulatory or just, you know, working together on projects that cross different types of modes and work. So thank you.
And also working with the private sector, because you can build sustainable community-based solutions that benefit everyone, that benefit the public, that benefit the private sector entities that are engaging in public-private partnerships. But it all starts with engaging communities first, communities early, communities first, communities consistently. That's the key to everything. So I just want to end and make sure that I hit that point.
Well said.
One last thing that I'll just add here. I think in terms of the impact of the pandemic, obviously, as previously mentioned, just the sense of urgency that has been created. But what does that lead to? And I think what we're excited for as a company is I think it leads to an environment where innovation and progress can really thrive. So you think about how does that relate to maybe the previous question too about procuring federal infrastructure investment. From the federal government's perspective, I think they would be looking into where can we make the biggest impact with the deployment of funds, and then how can we make sure that we're funding new innovative projects that are proving out new technology that can have a massive impact. And I think that's something that we're trying to do as a company that we think that needs to happen. I mean, even if you have been in New York the past couple of weeks, in August, you'll get text messages from Con Edison about preserving electricity in times where the grid is already stressed. So that's the reality that we live in today. And then you think about that's where we live in today. And at the same time, we're supposed to have millions of vehicles come onto the electric grid, this new massive source of demand. How is that going to happen? So I think what we need to be focused on is how can we be building out infrastructure projects, deployments that look to address those issues, new technologies, responsive demand, responsive charging, working within the constraints of how the grid actually operates. And in doing that, I think in putting that innovation foot forward, we'll give ourselves the best chance to procure the funding that the city so desperately needs.
Just lastly, I mean, we don't have an infrastructure bill yet. We need it signed. We need this bill signed. We're at the beginning of a transformational opportunity, and I've heard all my colleagues talking about it, but this will make life better for us, our children, their children, while driving our economy now, which is what we need. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you to make that happen and raise the bar with investing in our workforce, but more importantly, getting people to work and opening up our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. All right. That wraps us up. Thank you, Ralph.
Right then, thank you so much, Katie, for being our moderator and this really important discussion and for being so gracious before. And a big thanks to all our panel members. Again, really incredible discussion, very important. I'd like to just take a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors of today's event. Thank you to iCore Strategies. Thank you to Casira, KPMG, TD Bank, ACOM, Boingo, Cozen O'Connor, Infrastructure Engineering, L&M Development Partners, Revel, and WSP. Now let's get into our last and final panel, moderated by Lorna Stark, partner and national leader for government and public sector at KPMG. The panel is titled Technology and Innovations in New York Construction, Development, and the Workforce.
Thank you very much, Ralph. And it's a pleasure to be here to close out today's session. It's been such a very active and engaging conversation. And no doubt in my mind that the conversation, does spill over from piece to piece because it is such an important topic of discussion, the rebuilding of New York. We're also interested in that as New Yorkers. I've lived here in New York City for a very long time now, but started my career in Albany. So I'm really excited to be here to help share some of the perspectives from both the state and the city on this important topic. Before we jump in, I want to just do some really quick introductions of the panel that has been assembled for this last session. First and foremost, Commissioner RoAnn Destito. She's been the commissioner of OGS, the state's Office of General Services, for over 10 years, and was the first woman to be appointed to that position in the state of New York. She leads a very diverse team that is focused on transforming the work that OGS does in its service and support of other state agencies, as well as the public and the citizens, residents of New York. We're going to hear a little bit from her about one of her passions around her leadership in implementing the New York State Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Businesses Act, another very timely topic as we're going to get into some of the workforce-related issues today. And just one quick thing on OGS. Even in my years of work with the city and the state, and I did actually do some work for OGS back in my early Albany days, but it's still something I want you all to think about is the mission of OGS is so wide and so varied. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on design and construction aspect of OGS's mission. And that design and construction group is very large and very significant, 550 people in that organization with 100 licensed professional engineers and registered architects, and over $3 billion in active work across several streams, new construction, design development, and emergency contracting, which has been so important during the last 18 months. Secondly, we have Michael Garner, the Chief Diversity Officer from the MTA. Very excited to see Michael again. I think Michael, when you were you at the SCA years ago? Yes, okay. So the same Michael Garner, who has been a champion throughout his career for minorities and minority-owned businesses throughout the city and the state. And in his role, he has been the architect of MTA's small business development program, which has had really significant results in less than 10 years that he's been working at it and leading that. Next, we have Suri Kasira, who is the founder and president, CEO of Kasira, which is, many of you know, she is not a stranger to this stage or many of the other stages across the city of New York. Her firm is a government relations firm known to probably everyone and anyone who knows anything about city and state. So really excited to have you here today, Suri. And then last but not least, of course, we have Mark Wallenborg, who is standing in for Lena Punchwag, who is putting out some fires. We all know that those happen and we have to address them as needed. But Mark is the Executive Director and Chief Strategy Officer from New York City's Department of Buildings. So a very well-balanced group of leaders across the city and the state to talk about this topic around technology and innovation in construction and development, and the workforce that supports those activities. So I want to get, as we move into the conversation, I want to get more into that discussion around workforce. But before we do, just to link back to the common theme across the entire afternoon, from Rachel Loeb's opening comments, even to Jerry Jannetty's final comments in the last panel about the infrastructure bill. And Michael, let me start with you. The MTA surely will benefit from and also receive a significant amount of these funds. And as Jerry said, we just need to get it signed. What does that infrastructure bill mean for New York and for the MTA?
First of all, thank you. And also I'm gratified to be shared this panel with both RoAnn and Suri, who I know both for a long period of time since my SCA days. And they bring value to everything that they do. And I just wanted to state that the infrastructure bill, a recent conversation I had with both Congressman Greg Meeks and Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, that they supported the infrastructure bill because they want to see communities of color benefit from this funding. And so I will flip for a second and just state what it means to the MTA, what it means to this region. It will further support our $54.8 billion capital program, which will allow us to modernize the system, make the system ADA accessible. It will also means that we will have the ability to transport our 6.2 million customers pre-COVID to their workplaces and other leisure places that they want to attend. And so this infrastructure bill funding is extremely important for the MTA, extremely important for the region, but it's also extremely important for the certified MW and DBE and SDVOB firms in this region. If you recall, President Biden ran on a platform that if elected, he was going to help eliminate and eradicate poverty within the Black and Brown communities. What better way to do that than fund opportunities, contracts to historically excluded M&WBE firms that allows them to hire staff, to bring value to this region, better educational opportunities, home ownership opportunities, and healthcare options. And so once again, this bill, once signed, we must have the ability as the MTA and other government agencies that's going to dispense some of this funding to not only spend taxpayers' dollars in a cost-effective manner, but in an inclusive manner as well, as we modernize our system and get our 6.2 million passengers to their destinations safely on a daily basis.
Very true. And Suri, I think, you know, the variety and diversity of the clients that you serve, they certainly must be also looking forward to the infrastructure bill, and not only the jobs and the economic activity that brings with it, but what are some of the other things that the infrastructure bill will mean for the city of New York and the state of New York? Suri, you're on mute. I know that's the most said thing on any virtual session.
Oh my gosh, I literally say this at every single Zoom. There's somebody who's on mute and talking, and I can't believe I'm the one.
End of the day, it's okay.
So I just firstly want to say thank you to City and State for tackling this really important topic thank you, Lorna, for agreeing to moderate this. And I really am honored to share the stage with RoAnn and Michael and Mark, such important servants of government, public servants who've dedicated their lives to helping the city and state. And we need you now more than ever. And it's really an honor and pleasure to be able to partner with you on behalf of New York. I think the transportation issue is such an important issue, and I'm so glad that Michael has joined this panel. In order for people to return to work, one of the key factors, and I hear this from my employees every day, is the concerns about public transportation, public safety on public transportation, making sure that there is quality of public transportation, and making sure that it's as COVID-free as you can get, that there is good cleaning and so forth. So transportation, I think, is a very, very key issue in New York in general, public transportation, but particularly now around COVID. But there are so many of our clients that we have been able to work with around the issues around public transportation. So whether it's improving the area around Penn Station and Gateway, and really the coordination of really making sure that that area is safe and is really developed properly. Whether it's, we work closely with the New York City Building Congress, many of whose members are involved in major infrastructure projects in New York City and New York State, which will benefit from the stimulus money and the infrastructure bill. Whether it's Cubic, that's working closely with the MTA on omni payments. And again, that is post-COVID just really important to be able to pay without, touching things, being able to pay on your phone, being able to have a one fare payment system. So I think, public transportation is a big piece of it, but everybody knows that the infrastructure, it's not a positive thing to talk about. Oftentimes elected officials don't take the time to think about these projects because they're very, very long-term, they're very expensive. But as you said, Lorna, they create jobs and economic development. And I think especially we need to focus, as Michael said, on small businesses, on minority-owned businesses, create opportunity, and create pipelines for young people to be able to have these jobs.
Absolutely. It will certainly drive economic activity and the jobs. Very much, I'm thinking, much more about how like it is to the stimulus in the 08-09 variety and driving that jobs, and without really talking about the same old shovel ready prospects, but really how do we modernize the services that government's providing, modernize the infrastructure in particular. I want to switch gears. I know we've talked a lot about infrastructure and the infrastructure bill today, and we've just had a panel on transportation. And Commissioner Destito, we did speak earlier this week, and over the afternoon, I've been thinking more and more about the state of New York, and having come from upstate myself and my mother coming from the North Country, really, if you think about it, the state of New York is, on 3 sides at least, or 2.5 sides, is actually bordered by water. Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, St. Lawrence River, Lake Champlain, the Long Island Sound, the Atlantic Ocean, the Hudson Bay. If the Albany Post Road hadn't gone up the east side of the Hudson River, probably the Hudson River would have been the border between New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. So, I want to talk a little bit about the environmental aspects and issues, the E in ESG that we're all hearing so much about, and the growing emphasis. And I want to ask you about that, how that emphasis is emerging around resiliency, sustainability, and the other environmental regulatory initiatives that are happening around the state. And I know that OGS is very involved in this area. Commissioner, you are also on mute. I'm sorry.
Okay, how's that?
That's beautiful.
Right. We all do it, right?
We do.
First, I want to thank City and State for having this discussion. And Lauren, I want to thank you. Michael, it's great to see you again. Wish we could see each other in person. And Suri, thank you. And Mark, it's great to join such great professionals on this panel. Well, I guess I'm going to bring in the rest of the state because with the environment and countering climate change, the state implemented the regional dredging project or the Resiliency and Economic Development Initiative on Lake Ontario, approximately 450 miles of really waterfront property that during the time of rain and climate change was really affected. And we've been asked by the state to implement the dredging project, which includes the dredging of 20 navigational channels along Lake Ontario's South Shore and the St. Lawrence River, which we all forget is our northern border. And it's a significant aspect of New York State's 300 million READY initiative. The dredging is removing the built up sediment that's in the bottom of these waterways to really bring a continued safe harbor and passage of watercraft, but also to bring the level of the water down so that it doesn't impact the properties along this waterfront area. And it really impacted businesses, homes. It really dealt a economic development blow to many of the businesses and communities along its waterfront. The objective was to provide a comprehensive approach to dredging needs for harbor navigational channels, but it was used primarily for recreational boating, but also refuge in the region. And this project really tackles the necessary dredging of up to 20 channels that were really through a phase 1 and phase 2. But during phase 3, because we can't always be there, the state will provide the counties with the information that they need to update, expand, and implement their long-term operational maintenance and funding plans to maintain this recreational channels in the future. So we're empowering them as a region to continue the work and to work together. We've actually brought them all together to form this phase 3 and to form this coalition. So we've completed 9 ready dredging projects and removed approximately 44,454 cubic yards of sediment to provide safe access to Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. So those projects were very important to the communities and the economic effort that they have certainly all year round.
Sure. And it's interesting too that, part of the issue in New York State with, especially with the lakes, like Ontario, is too much water versus, other states and jurisdictions, there's not enough water. And let me take you, while we stay on this topic of environmental issues and impact to climate change and the resiliency efforts that we've had going on for almost a decade now, post Superstorm Sandy. And let's go all the way down to the southern shores of New York and talk about, how important were those resiliency measures and preparedness that we've been doing over the last 8, 9, 10 years since Sandy? How did that help us? Or maybe it didn't. 2 weeks ago when we experienced Ida, another direct hit on our southern shore.
Well, I'll answer that. And I can tell you, just anecdotally, we'd like to send some of our water to the West Coast. I think we're getting a little bit too much of it. But with that said, after Sandy, OGS, so you can see the diversity that we work. We work at Lake Ontario and upstate New York, and certainly during Sandy, OGS led approximately 120 emergency contracts valued at about 78 million under our Executive Order 47 and Executive Order 55. Emergency requests were received from multiple state agencies, which means we respond to many of our customers, which are other state agencies or authorities. And we received these from these agencies, and work ranged from infrastructure work, upgrading and repairing storm systems. We did roof work, we did generator work, and hardening of parking lots and beach restoration at many of our New York State parks. We did a lot of work for our sister agency, Parks and Recreation. But the largest emergency was the completion of the $32 million in rehabilitation work at the South Beach Psychiatric Center. And we believe that the work we did in these places really did sustain and provide the resiliency during Ida.
Wonderful. It's not fortunate that we were testing those
No.
resiliency measures, but
We don't want to test them, but yeah.
We don't want to test them, but thankfully they were in place and did help. Michael, I want to turn this same topic to you. We've all seen the videos of the flooding subways a week and a half ago. How have those recent events taken a toll once again on the city's infrastructure, and in particular across the subways and other infrastructure assets of the MTA more broadly?
Yes, so you mentioned Hurricane Sandy, and after Hurricane Sandy, the MTA took extreme measures in order to mitigate a lot of our subway stations in case there was another hurricane. And so I'll tell you, you saw that horrifying picture of one of our subway stations on 28th Street, where the water was just gushing through the subway station. Had we not taken those extreme measures after Hurricane Sandy, this system would have been shut down for 2 or 3 or 4 days, and the whole region would have been paralyzed. But thankfully, there was visionaries leading the helm here at the MTA after Hurricane Sandy, and we invested billions of dollars in the infrastructure to make sure that the MTA and our properties will be able to sustain any other kind of storms that came. And sure enough, it did. And so, and that's another reason why we need to ascertain the federal funding from the infrastructure bill, so we can continue to mitigate our system and our properties. So when those adverse storms come again, which they will, we will be better prepared in order to save our system and to make sure that it's operating 24/7, 365. And let me tell you, you mentioned the North Country, and I'm a SUNY Buffalo grad, and I had a recent conversation with Mayor Byron Brown, and I told him the worst kept secret in the state of New York is that Buffalo is not an East Coast city; it's a Midwestern city. It's on Lake Erie, right, which shares with a Cleveland, and it has the same manufacturing feel as Detroit and as Cleveland. So Buffalo is a Midwestern city.
That's true, and they drink pop out there.
Right.
That's right. That's right.
Some of my New York City friends don't know what that is. Story, I'd like to, in the same context around the environmental impacts and the resiliency measures that are being taken and been so effective, thankfully, what challenges and changes does that have on the future workforce for the industry around, these infrastructure heavy assets and in maintaining, the safety of our citizens and residents?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the opportunity that some of this has created around green jobs. In particular, I'm very enthusiastic about the green jobs opportunities. I am a board member at the League of Conservation Voters, and very actively I'm engaged in the issues of sustainability, and green opportunities. And I want to, whether it's retrofitting outdated equipment, solar equipment, the development of new green opportunities, aspects of manufacturing. And I want to talk about two clients in particular that we have been engaged with around the green jobs opportunity. We represent non-traditional employment for women and work very closely with Michael and have created lots of opportunities at the MTA, but also just opportunities, not just in terms of public sector, but also in terms of the private sector. And we have been working with New, who's pioneered the Green Collar Prep Program, which is integrating the workforce curriculum on environmental construction techniques and efficiency, energy efficiency. And we've learned a lot about being fluid in environmental sustainability positions. And it's, I think, very, very exciting. The other organization, not-for-profit, that we work with is called the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. And they are an organization that is a coalition of many different folks in the workforce development space. And they have been asking, recommending the creation of permanent workforce development fund to expand the pipeline in green technologies, particularly around the excluded communities, environmental justice communities, and prioritizing that in terms of training and hiring. And we are now working with the Employment and Training Coalition to ensure that their blueprint is in front of our new administration when we have a new mayor in November, when he gets elected. And that's on the desks of the new city council members. As many of you might know, we have about 30 some odd new council members out of 51. And so we want to make sure that as those new folks come in, many of them have never been in government before, have never been elected officials before, that we have the opportunity to put these ideas in front of them and brief them on these opportunities. And I want to say one thing about the New York Employment and Training Coalition. There are so many people that lost their jobs through COVID, and they are looking for opportunities to retrain in new fields. And I think we have a responsibility to create opportunities, new opportunities. And so we need training for people. And I think if anybody has ever been to the non-traditional employment for women benefit, you can just hear the stories of these women. And I never leave with a dry eye because, it's really life-changing when you create opportunities and create jobs and training that leads to a really good paying job. It really can change somebody's life.
That's very true. And I really like that unique perspective around what are the jobs of the future and what does the infrastructure bill mean for those jobs of the future? And, how is it different than the jobs of today? And what is the training that's going to be needed to, enable that new workforce and, the green jobs and green technology? What a great open area for people to move into and have a really exciting future and career in that area as well. And you touched on a little bit, Suri, also the impact of COVID on the workforce. And so I want to actually turn now as we are running down on our time today to talk a little bit more about those impacts of COVID. And Mark Wallenberg, I know he's here. I see his name there. Hopefully
I'm here.
Still here. There he is. Yay. I want to ask you about any examples in particular around, I like to call it a bit of a silver lining in COVID-19, right? Our mothers always said, in every cloud, there's a silver lining. And as we start to emerge from COVID and then step back a couple steps back into COVID, But we're beginning to see, as governments, and especially in the city and the state, start to reopen the doors of government offices, that there are some really great learnings and some new technologies that we've put in place during COVID to be able to continue providing those necessary public services. Are there any examples from Department of Buildings where the pandemic accelerated those modernizations and use of technology that will stay around and be useful into the future?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you again for having me. And first, apologies on behalf of Lena Ponchwag, who was not able to make it and is actually tackling an environmental issue, helping the department's efforts to help homeowners recover from Ida. And also, since the last speaker was speaking frequently about energy, I'd like to recognize some of my colleagues at the Department of Buildings who have been working diligently over the past couple of years in expanding the department's role on energy and sustainability. So anybody who works with us, files with us, will see and hear more about those topics from the department as a whole. Switching to COVID, the question you just mentioned, yes, it has been a bit of a silver lining. The department has been going through a multi-year initiative to increase our use of technology, move to online platforms completely, reduce the amount of paper that we take in, and in many areas, in some areas, the switch to work from home, and because of COVID, sped that up. It presented areas for us to maybe not incorporate right away the long-term plans that we did have on our agenda, but at least to implement sort of interim processes that take us part of the way there, both for our own internal staff and also for our customers, those who do business with the department. We quickly looked at ways to help customers from not having to come in and to reduce the foot traffic in our offices. So we implemented a large number of online technologies. They're not the permanent solutions that we had planned for a year and a half ago, but we're not going to go back from them. We'll keep them in place for a couple years perhaps, or shorter, until we implement the long-term strategic solutions that we already had. And then from our internal staff, working from home, like for everybody, but I would say maybe even a bit more so for city staff, that was quite a change that we had to adapt to, especially I think city government. If you had asked us a year and a half ago and mentioned working from home, that would have been quite a surprising ask. But I think as a whole, it has made our agency and other city agencies more resilient and adaptable. So if unfortunately other situations occur, natural disasters or whatever, the workforce will be more adaptable.
Yes, a new definition of who can work even during a snowstorm. The kids don't like that, but and neither do the teachers probably. But it is our new reality. And Commissioner Destito, we touched on this a little bit the other day too. So maybe let's stay on this topic of what are the changes going forward for the workforce? How will we accommodate differing needs across the workforce, and all the other things that our government agencies and even corporate companies have to do to make the workplace safe?
Sorry. So we had to absolutely maneuver towards making sure our workplace was safe. Our design and construction group actually is back to pre-COVID activity levels, but even during COVID, they did, in fact, many of our construction projects continued due to the essential nature of many of their programs. But in our own buildings, OGS actually owns and operates 57 buildings across the state. So we had to make sure that our air handling and all of our HVAC were geared towards the higher levels of air filtration, and making sure that we made sure our buildings were healthy and safe for those who had to come back to work. But I agree that many people were able to work from home, and they did work from home, but we made sure that those who had to come in, since we're an operational agency, we had to have people in our buildings, and certainly my staff was here working. We made sure that we had, we introduced more fresh air into our buildings through our air handlers, and certainly, all of the air filtration. We went up to the higher levels of, air filters, and 13 to 14 to 15, and made sure that our buildings were safe, but also made sure that people were spaced properly. And we will continue that level of, workspace requirements into the future. And we're doing that wherever we're making, changes. But we've also instituted a lot of what, the previous speaker was saying. We instituted electronic document submissions in lieu of, the Mylars, and we did electronic stamps, signatures on some documents, and electronic bidding. These measures will remain in place. We wanted to do it. It forced us to do it faster than, we probably would have if, this hadn't happened. But we're utilizing drones, laser scanning, and to some extent, a building information modeling software called Revit. And we currently have an initiative underway to incorporate virtual design and construction technologies from the initiation of the design through construction, and eventually client operations and maintenance. So we're doing a lot of different ways and moving into, the technology in the 21st century for design and construction. And I just want to say, again, Jamaica Armory is one of our, premier projects. It's a example of work that continued during COVID in Queens. It's a Jamaica Armory is $100 million full building renovation project, and the project started at the onset of COVID and continued throughout. And at times that contractor had about 85 people on site, safely engaged in the abatement and demolition activities. So we really did continue to work. Now, there were other agencies like Corrections and Veterans Affairs that, we couldn't, because we couldn't put the people at risk. The veteran services, they have their veteran homes. We wouldn't put them at risk, but where we could continue to work, we did. State Police, Division of Military Affairs, and some of the Office of Mental Health. We did some construction projects during the height of COVID, but where we couldn't, we had to stop. So we had some stop work orders, and we worked with our contractors and our vendors to make sure that it was acceptable to both the state of New York as well as the vendors. We worked out the contracts and the stop work orders that we had to implement. So we continued to work, and we did things differently, but things that I think are going to bring us, we're going to be in a better place in the future, and we'll just build upon those changes.
Yes, yes. And as I said, silver linings. And Michael, speaking of things never stopping, the subway never stops, except, to clean it between, whatever, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., which was new for us. But what are some of the other technology and innovations that came about during COVID at the MTA that are going to be around to stay?
Zoom meetings. I mean, I mean, this is a new way of doing business. Zoom. I mean, we were home from March 16th until July 6th, and in my days at home was one Zoom meeting after another one. And so it's a more cost-effective, efficient way of conducting business. No longer, Sherry, am I going to hop on a flight to go to LA for a meeting? I'm gonna hop on the Zoom, but let me just talk about COVID-19 for a second. And you hit upon that point. We shut down our system from 2 to 4 a.m. because we disinfected our subway stations and also our subway trains and trains, right? And so under ordinary circumstances, when you talk about an emergency declaration, all of the normal procurement procedures get thrown out of the window. And so just because it was an emergency declaration did not mean that M&W and SDVOB firms need not to apply. So we went out of our way and we hired a qualified pool of vendors that would help us in disinfecting our system with COVID services and supplies. And so since March of 2020, we spent over $110 million with minority women-owned firms, $110 million. Let me also say that I was listening to a NBC national news story one morning, and it was indicated that women have been adversely affected by COVID-19. And so I came into my office and I said, listen, I want you to generate data to tell me how many dollars we paid to women-owned businesses in 2 years, even during COVID-19. That number was $880 million. So in a 2-year period, we paid $880 million to women-owned businesses, even during COVID. So even during a crisis, there is still opportunity.
Absolutely. Those are very significant figures. And I think it may be surprising too to see how much was really going on despite COVID. And, you know, as Commissioner Destito was saying, and same with MTA, Michael, there was so much that was able to get done during COVID. The measures taken to keep those workers safe, of course, but also keeping the rest of our New Yorkers safe, and at the same time keeping a workforce productive and getting a lot done. I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that I could go anywhere in the system with the touchless payment, whereas pre-COVID, it was dependent on the station that I was coming to or going to. Maybe let's also talk a little bit about the development activities in New York. And Suri, I'll start with you on this one. We'll see a greater investment in maybe mixed use. We talked about this earlier in one of the other panels, less commercial space, using commercial space for potentially for schools or for housing. How can we take this opportunity to rebuild communities to create opportunity, jobs, and also a positive impact on equity in the city?
Well, firstly, I just want to echo what Michael said. I think that while we're all back-to-back Zoom calls and incredibly productive, it is a tremendous stress to live like that. And sometimes when you actually jumped on the subway, you had a minute to think before your next meeting, or to read a document, or to prepare, or to read a briefing, or to read some paperwork. And there just isn't that time. And I think it has disproportionately affected women. I know I had 3 kids home, and the doorbell's ringing and kids are coming in and wanting lunch, and and I'm trying to navigate in the middle of a presentation. So it creates its own challenges. And I, for one, I'm in my office. I am thrilled to be back to the office. I found it very, very challenging to work from home. It had its own challenges. And so I think, the health and wellness aspect of offices and of buildings has become incredibly important. And we've had the opportunity to work with Delos, which is a wellness certification. And I think more and more buildings were starting pre-COVID, but more and more buildings want to be able to be certified as having sensitivity to wellness and health. They have their own air purification system. We have worked with city and state government to make that available. As Michael said, there were also cleaning opportunities and making sure that buildings are clean, offices are clean, the subways are clean in a way that people could feel comfortable. using those. But I think really looking, and I know myself in my own office, we were very crowded and all in small quarters. And we are now looking for bigger office space so that we can be more spread out and we can have the opportunity to have more space and have just a better quality of life in addition to a healthier space. I think the opportunity to look at outdoor spaces, spaces that have outdoor aspects of it, waterfront where people can walk out and sit on a bench and have lunch outside has become very, very of interest to many people that are looking for spaces. Again, I think retrofitting spaces has created opportunities. You know, can you look at elevators where you don't have to touch the button and so forth? And just lastly, I want to say that I think we have not yet seen all the new technologies that have been and will be created. As more and more people go back to the offices, there will be more technology, new technologies that people will create and give thought to. And you know, it's been exciting for us to be able to talk to government about those new opportunities. And I was with Eric Adams, our hopefully new mayor very soon this morning, and he talked about his administration being very committed to looking at the private sector for innovation, particularly as we get people back to work post-COVID. And that was really an exciting thing to hear. So, you know, I think sometimes government is slow to respond to new technology. And I hope that we're going to see a lot of new technology, and I'm excited about bringing those opportunities to government, whether it means getting permits for them, whether it means getting sign-offs from them, or whether it means government using those new technologies.
Yeah, we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. I agree on technology. And that's the thing about technology today. It's changing every single day. And for governments to be able to harness technology they did during COVID, we certainly now see the possibilities and they are there. So a lot more to come. And maybe I see Ralph has popped in. So I know we're right at our 4:10 time slot. Ralph, would you like us to do any final comments, or do you want to close out the session for the day?
We're really short on time. If everyone wants to get a quick 30-second last soundbite, go for it.
All right, Commissioner, we want to start with you.
Well, I want to talk about my SDVOB project.
I know you do.
So I'm going to just tell you that at the Great New York State Fair, we announced that OGS certified 15 more SDVOBs, which means that New York State has now a total of 900 certified businesses active in the program. And we have grown from approximately $16 million in payments to certified companies in 2016 to nearly $150 million. And I expect that to grow by the end of the fiscal year to $170 million. So that means by March 31st or April of next year, we should be at $170 million. But contributing to that success is the searchable web-based directory that New York State certified SDVOBs have on our OGS website. And I encourage everyone to use it, whether you're in the public sector, private sector. There are great SDVOB, service disabled veteran-owned businesses that are looking for your work, and they do a great job. And we had 2 of them at the Great State Fair with us, and they were in the technology field. They're in the construction resource business. So we encourage people to use our website and use that directory. So thank you for letting me talk about that. Thanks, Lorna. You knew I wanted to talk about that.
I know you did, and I want everyone to hear about it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And it's
I think
great
Michael will want, yeah, and
great
Michael's
to be with
so
everybody.
passionate.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
So newsflash, the MTA awarded a major contract last month to an Hispanic-owned company out of the South Bronx called Century. They were awarded a $267 million contract
Great.
Base contract with options, 2-year options that could exceed 400 million. And it's in our core business was transportation, paratransit. So stay tuned. There'll be a press conference and a press release. We're going to go to their corporate headquarters in the Bronx. And the great thing about it is that they are hiring residents from a New York City Housing Authority project right across the street. So how best is it in taking government taxpayer monies and creating opportunities in every sector of this city? Stay tuned. Century.
And I just wanted to give one quick pitch for getting back to the office. While I think COVID has taught us a lot about the importance of flexibility and that we can work from home on a snow day, I think the value of collaboration, the value of really being able to walk over to someone's desk and talk to them, the value of being able to onboard people in person, the value of just the friendships and the good things that come out of people being in the same place is tremendous. And it's just really, really hard, particularly for women who have young children, to be working from home. A lot of us don't have space. A lot of us keep getting interrupted, and little kids have a lot of needs. So I just a pitch for the value of getting back to the offices, even if it's only a few days a week in the beginning. It is tremendously valuable to be together.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I think we'll turn it back to you, Ralph. And thank you to all of the panelists. And thank you, Mark, for standing in for Lena on such short notice. Really enjoyed the entire afternoon, but back over to you, Ralph.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna. And thank you, everyone, for that great discussion. Thank you for the news flash, Michael. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors one last time. Thank you to iCore Strategies, Cassirer, KPMG, TD Bank, ACOM, Boingo, Cozen O'Connor, Infrastructure Engineering, L&M Development Partners, Revel, and WSP. We have a few upcoming events I'd like to put on everyone's radar. Please join us Thursday, September 30th at 1 p.m. for our first Addressing New York's Most Vulnerable Virtual Summit. Registration is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. Please join us on Wednesday, October 13th at 5 p.m. for our annual New York City 40 Under 40 virtual celebration. Registration is free and can be found on our website and in the chat. And please join our sister organization, NYN Media, for their annual virtual checkup on October 21st at 1 p.m. This webinar will help nonprofits best assess the health of their organization as we enter the next phase of the pandemic and going forward into the new normal. Registration is free and can be found on the NYN website and in the chat. And last but not least, I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us to learn a bit more about rebuilding New York. Thank you to all our speakers and panelists. I hope to see you all at the next webinar. Stay safe and mask up.